All right, we'll call the meeting to order, and I'll look to committee if there's any disclosures of pecuniary interest. Seeing none, we'll move to the agenda. Would any members like anything pulled? Anything else?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to pull 3 and 6, please. Sorry, and 7. Too bad.
Anything else? I think there was a request to deal with number 18 at the same time with consent items. Just look to the committee if there's any concerns with that. Items for direction, number 18. Any concerns with that?
A request?
It's a request to deal with number 18 during the consent items from staff. Okay, so we'll look for a motion for to move consent item number 5 and items for direction number 18. So the items that have been pulled are number 2, 3, 4, 6, and 7.
Which one?
So right now, we're going to deal with items number 5 and 18. Yes, we did. All right, so the motion was up, and we'll look for a motion to move and receive. Sorry, mover and a seconder. Any discussion? And we'll call the question. And we're voting.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-0.
Great, thank you. So we'll go to number 2. I believe that was Councillor Squire.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I just had one question, and hopefully it can be answered. Under item number 10, secondary dwelling units, it says that the committee affirmed the position that was set out by the Ministry of Municipal Affairs. And I just want to make sure that's the position that secondary units no longer have a prohibition against non-owners occupying both units, but that they would be kept out of or excluded from the greater near campus neighborhood. That's my understanding of what the minister's position was, but I just want to clarify.
Through the chair, the presentation was made by our planning department to the Housing Advisory Committee. I understand that to be the situation, but I'll confirm it for you and get back to you.
That would be great if you could confirm that to me. I think it is, but a confirmation would be good.
Any further speakers on number 2? All right, we'll look for a motion to move and receive. Sorry, I think I'm right. And we'll call the question. And we're voting. I'm sorry, do you want to vote manually? Yay, from Councillor Armstrong, voting manually.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Item number 3, I believe that was Councillor Usher.
Mr. Chair, I just want to commend staff on this initiative. I think this is a very good initiative, but I do have one question. And by the way, I really, really appreciate this report on this subject. And I'll talk a little bit more about it when we get to item number 8. But my question is that it says that the current provincial commitment of $1.125 million over 3 years running through March 31st, 2018. And I thought that this program goes to the end of 2018. Can I get a little explanation for that?
Through the chair, it's a grant program from the province, so the funding does end at the end of March, and our initiatives are tied to that timeline under the HKCC program. It is interrelated with the Child and Youth Agenda and the efforts in that initiative, so some of those will carry forward past the March 31st, 2018 timeframe, but those that are directly supported by this grant will end when the funding ends.
Any further speakers? All right, so we'll move that on the screen. And call the question.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Item number 6, I believe that was Councilor Usher's again. Number 6?
Yeah. You want to have it? Okay.
My apologies. Item number 4, Councilor Squire.
Thank you very much, through you, Mr. Chair. I have to profess I have concerns with this, this particular policy, but I would ask a couple of questions through the chair. My primary concern is releasing information and not maybe extend beyond the fact someone was convicted of an offense. In other words, I'm very concerned about us issuing a press release that someone has been summoned or charged when there has not been a finding of guilt. So what I'm asking is there some public policy goal behind releasing the names of people other than the public, it being in the public domain in any event? Because that I would have to know before I could support this. Or is it just that council somehow directed that this take place?
Through the chair, this policy is in response to a council direction to share the information, have it posted. We've been clear that it's largely about where tickets have been paid or convictions have occurred, but there is a section around, under the discretion of the chief, there may be a time where we wish to release it. The kind of example that we might be thinking about in that instance would be in the instance of the Oxford Street fire, where the seriousness of the charges were of significant public interest, but I would suggest to you that it would be a very rare occurrence, but I believe that is the intention behind including that in the policy.
I'm not going to be supporting this on principle. It's not something that I would generally support. I don't think there's a good public policy reason to do this. I think there can be harm, certainly in my experience, of having people's names published before there's been an adjudication. And even though the intention may be good, I can't support this. But I don't ascribe any bad faith or anything to this.
So I'll just ask, because I wanted to speak to this, and so I'll ask the vice chair to just take the chair for the remainder of this, and then if you put me on the list.
Okay, I have the chair. Councilor Sally?
Thank you, Presiding Chair. So I'm prepared to move the staff recommendation. I was a councilor who brought this forward. The intent was really to raise public awareness and ensure that the community was safe and aware. And this kind of stems from, in my ward, there was a fire on Oxford Street that resulted in the death of an individual. And it was an unfortunate incident that should have never happened in our community. So all this information is already available in public domain. If you go to a courthouse, you'll know before someone is even convicted. There's a docket and it'll name the people who have been issued fines or summons or whatever may be the case. If someone is charged by the police, sometimes the name will be disseminated. We're not asking, I don't believe the intent is to ask for a press release, but there's a way where it's more accessible. The information is already available. Even, for example, when we look at inspection reports, a realtor can actually come to the City of London, pay the $5 fee, and get that information for a specific unit. So the information is already available. It's just about a matter of being more accessible and being more transparent and allowing people to be more aware of some of the risks or make their own informed decision. And I think this is something I hope all my colleagues can support. So I'll move that and I'll look for a seconder.
Let's see about the second. Councilor Armstrong.
I remember us having this discussion before about this policy, and it was, I saw both sides of this issue. What Councillor Squire is alluding to may have some validity in my mind. That, and I think the argument here is that, as the chair said, that it is available through the courts. If you go and do a search you know, the files are there. So it is a matter of public record, but is it our responsibility, where a person's been charged, to be the one to disseminate that information? Quite often when people are charged, for an example, with the police, they'll just say charges are pending. They won't mention the person's name, but the occurrence happened. Now, I can see one exception where it might make some sense if it was deemed by our staff, especially by law enforcement, that there was some compelling public safety issue, then I could see perhaps, for an example, they were wanting to know if there were other properties under the care of a certain business that may be, you know, subject or should be looked into as well because of an occurrence at one location, then I could see that that's some kind of justification. But for us to be doing, maybe not press releases, but the fact is when we release any information, it's usually to the press. So I tend to agree with Councillor Squire until such time as a person has been found guilty. You can do great harm only to find out to a person's reputation, because unfortunately, we are a very judgmental community. And just the fact that a person is charged, sometimes it's enough in our mind that they're convicted. And I think we have to give people, in whatever situation, the opportunity to go through the process and not be judged until such time as they are judged. So in this particular case, while I supported this in the past, I'm not going to support it now. So I'm going to vote against this.
Any other speakers? Councillor Cassidy. Hold on a second. Mr. Chair, I'll pass this back on to you. Okay, Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Mr. Presiding Officer. So I just want to get some clarification, because I think it said in the report that that it would most often be those convicted, but it could also be those charged, as you said, as Ms. Livingston said through you. So I'm wondering if we could, if the mover might be amenable to an amendment saying that we would only release the information if there's actually a conviction.
You have an answer? Go ahead.
So through you, Mr. Presiding Chair, I think the difficulty is that in the sense that by the time sometimes you may get to a conviction, whether it's a year or 2 years, that's a year or 2 years of people waiting, and that awareness piece might not be able, if you look at it, for example, the situation with Oxford Street, that was already, once he was charged, it was already front page on the newspaper and everything. What we're trying to say really is saying that if people want to access, if I'm a renter going out there and saying I want to look for a place to move and I have vulnerable members in my family who I want to place somewhere, I can go on the city website, look it up real quick, pull that information, and if there is a pending charge that is of significant public safety that the fire chief or the chief bylaw official have deemed to be meeting the threshold to put on the website, then I think that's one of those situations. As they mentioned earlier, this would be very rare, and most of the cases would be in the sense where it's folks who have already been convicted and charged.
Councillor Squire.
I want to be really clear, and I have all due respect for the chair, that's not what this policy says at all. It does not say we're only going to release in these circumstances. It says, I looked at the policy, what information can be released? Any release of enforcement information must comply with the following. It must not compromise enforcement or prosecution matters, and must comply with all applicable legislation. It doesn't say we're only going to do it in really serious cases where public safety is at risk. But here's the part that does bother me. How information can be released. There are many means of releasing information publicly, including press release. So press release is there, that's a method available. Social media. So if I'm charged with an offense and I believe in all sincerity that I'm innocent, I haven't done anything wrong, I could, and please don't, I hope no one says, well, we wouldn't do that, because you're allowed to. You could go on Twitter and say, you know, here it is, Phil Squire charged with offense under some act. I would be mortified if before I had even had my chance to go to court, my name was out there in the social media. There could be a press release says Phil Squire's been convicted of not properly licensing something. I mean, these are serious implications for people, and I'm just not going to vote in favor of it. But we have to be very careful in debate when we start saying, well, it really means this. You have to actually read what it says. And for me, this information is already available in the public sphere. I do not want to heap on someone else's misfortune by then tweeting that they've been charged with an offense. And every fiber of my training says, do not do that. So I'm fine if anybody else wants to vote for it. I didn't speak up to try to influence anyone. I just want to vote the way that I feel is right, which is to vote against this.
Okay, anyone else? Councillor Armstrong?
I guess if there was an issue with one particular unit in one particular building and, or one situation involving one person, charge was laid. Now we're sending out a message, don't do business with that person, because they've been charged. But later on, as information comes in and things are looked at, there's a finding of no guilt, you know, for whatever reason. Meanwhile, we've been disseminating this thing that, you know, don't do business with this person's been charged. That person, quite frankly, if in most cases this is a business issue, that person could be out of business. Yet later on, we find out that maybe, you know, an error's been made, and the fact is sometimes, and I would ask Mr. Katolik this question, but I think I know what the answer is. You don't always get 100% when you lay charges, convictions. And sometimes as an issue goes along, sometimes people withdraw charges because, again, there isn't a reasonable expectation of getting a conviction because lack of evidence. But in the beginning, you believe that there was grounds. And so unless you have 100% for sure, meanwhile, that one person, you know, may suffer and then there's no finding of any guilt or any wrongdoing or an unsafe situation. It's not proven. So while you don't suffer through the courts and that, you suffer through public opinion and you know, and that sort of thing. And, you know, certainly if people have concerns, I wish we had some option where, you know, if you were going to place somebody in a facility or a situation that you could call in and ask, you know, is there any issues to do with that building? And then it's just given, yes, there is an issue, you know, we want to make you aware of that, or there isn't. I mean, that's a different thing than broadcasting either through social media or through press releases or any other means. Broadcasting it out there. I think if somebody has a concern, or if you're doing due diligence, you have somebody you care about and you're going to place them somewhere or see them rent something somewhere, that you make that inquiry of the city. Has there been any complaints or issues? I can see that, because that would be between a potential consumer and checking out, you know, just like you would call the Better Business Bureau. But this is a little different. This is beyond that. So again, I won't be supporting it. Certainly if we could go back and work on it a bit, I might support it down the road, but I hate to see somebody labeled and then there's no justification at a later date. That's pretty horrific to people, to be accused of things and then found not guilty and suffered the consequences in the meanwhile.
Councillor Cassidy?
Thank you, Mr. Presiding Officer. And through you, I have a question to staff. So it says that we currently post bylaw violation information on the website, but not fire code violations. How often is there overlap? So if there's bylaw violations, or if there are fire code violations, are there often also bylaw violations related?
Through the chair, there are several examples where there's a relationship between building code and bylaw violations and fire code violations, specifically with rental properties, because we do joint inspections with fire prevention on rental properties, and on business licensing, because we also partner with fire prevention in that regard.
Thank you. So I think two things. Number one, we capture a lot of that information through the posting of the bylaw of violations. People can check out to see, you know, the situation with a specific address, a specific rental unit, and get information that way. Secondly, when there is a high-profile thing, it tends to make front-page news. It tends to be in the newspaper, so people are aware of a particular address, or even a group of addresses that are associated with one landlord. No, that was the case with the Oxford Street fire. I share Councillor Squire's concerns about publicly shaming people that have not yet had their time in court to defend themselves, and so I won't be supporting this as well.
Anyone else? Okay. Councillor? Oh, yeah, it is.
Thank you. It looks like I might have to second it when it gets to council. I certainly can't do it here. But, you know, the parallel I would draw with the fire code violations and publishing those is with the health unit and food safety inspections. The health unit has a great website. They publish the results of all the inspections. They identify critical infractions, non-critical infractions for all the restaurants. And I just went on there and looked, and there's a report from the 19th of May, a particular restaurant, you know, they had a critical infraction. You can look at the all the list of inspections. You can filter it down. Just show me the critical infractions, and it gives you 443 results. And I just think it's a very easy way of understanding information. It's just part of running a food business, is that if you have infractions around food safety, it's going to be published so that the public knows that happens. And what it does is it encourages people not to have the infractions and to adhere to the rules, because that is not helpful to them to have that publicly advertised. Similarly, the results of the inspections go up right in the building so people can see it to say, did it get a pass? Was it conditional? What was the result? And I think those kind of transparency measures really help actually achieve the results of the legislation. With the fire code, like, this is really important, right? We don't want people to not follow the fire code. It can lead to all kinds of catastrophic outcomes. I think this is a very small, inexpensive thing we can do, which encourages people to adhere to it. We have people in the city who have repeated fire code violations over and over again, continuously problematic. And I want to try and discourage that as much as we can. So I think there's a lot of value in publishing this information. I think we have to be clear when charges are just laid and there's no conviction, that we need to make sure that's clear so people don't think, oh, this person's been convicted. There's a very big difference between being fined or being charged and actually being convicted in court. So I don't want to give people the false impression that something's happened that hasn't happened. I look forward to talking about it at council. I think the policy itself is okay. It's maybe not as detailed as I would like in terms of describing exactly how it's going to be operationalized. But I think it's really respecting the existing legislative framework, making sure we don't do things that are violating people's privacy. And I do think those kind of transparency measures are important. So I guess I look forward to talking about it at council.
Councillor Armstrong.
Mr. Through you to Mr. Katolik, on the issue of fire code violations, can you tell me when you inspect a building, let's say a duplex, and you went in and you found, one of your inspectors found a battery that was missing from the fire detector in an occupied unit. I guess this would be to the fire chief, that would be a violation of the code. And you could be written up for that, as I understand it.
Chief Carbone.
Am I correct on that, chief?
Chief Carbone.
Through the chair, that's correct. I can think of several scenarios in the past month where people have actually had fires. We found disabled smoke alarms are lacking, and we've actually written them up because that is a violation of the fire code. It's against the law, as well as carbon monoxide detectors today too.
It'd also be true too that if a tenant, for whatever reason, let's say they had a habit of smoking in a unit and setting off the fire detector, could actually take that battery out and can you tell me if you've run into situations like that where you just did sporadic investigations and you found a battery missing and that was the excuse that was given by the landlord?
We have had situations where we have found a tenant to be removing the battery, disabling the smoke alarm, and in that case, the tenant gets the ticket, not the owner.
Okay, so the thing is, if there's a battery missing, would you give the landlord an opportunity? You don't always write them up. You give them an opportunity to correct the situation, am I right?
There's discretions with the inspectors, they are assistants of the fire marshals. I won't say that every single time. I mean, if somebody can do something quickly, they don't necessarily get an inspection order or a ticket, but generally we've taken more of a zero tolerance approach because smoke alarms are one way you get out of a fire. And if it's disabled, that could be 90 seconds that you couldn't get out and has resulted in a number of fire deaths. We take that very serious.
And I hope you would, because smoke detectors are an important component to fire safety, the most important component in my mind. So I guess what I'm saying is you could get written up actually for a missing battery, and a tenant might have taken it out, but still as the landlord, if the tenant doesn't say they took it out, but rather it's just not there, then it falls back again, I think, to the landlord, that the landlord's responsible. Would that sort of be, have you run into situations like that?
Well, if it's in an apartment, and I'd have to say the door's down, the battery's out, and it's laying on the thing, it's hard to put that on the landlord, because you'd have to say the tenant. Obviously, the landlord didn't go in and do that. But said we have ticketed the tenants where we found them to be in non-compliance. We can go into an apartment and found that they're just not working because they haven't been tested. In that case, it would be the landlord or the owner that would actually be written up for the ticket. And just kind of going on smoke alarms, just the commitment that we've put in, starting 3 weeks ago, we've got our crews going out every night for approximately an hour and a half, and they'll go out until September, because we believe that smoke alarms and carbon monoxide detectors are that important. So while people may think that's just a small device, we see that as being a very, very important device and put a lot of resources into it.
Okay, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Mr. Presiding Officer. So if the issue is, as Councillor Helmer pointed out, identifying these addresses that are in violation of the fire code, and especially some of them that are repeatedly in violation, can we not link the release of the information to the address rather than to an individual, especially in a case, at least especially prior to conviction?
Through the chair, that's actually what our intention would be. It's to a business or an address and not a person. But I will suggest that even the best landlords in London will have fire code violations. We could go into a building today. I could probably walk through City Hall and find fire code violations. It's just the nature of it. And so if we go in and we find a smoke alarm not working, and you can name whatever landlord you want, some of the biggest, they would be up on the website as a violation.
Councillor Squire.
It's always nice to have Councillor Helmer here and continuing his practice of speaking last. But let me just, now that I have another opportunity to speak, I mean, with all due respect, we're all making the same mistake, which is to say, here's what we would like to see this policy do. But nobody's sort of going to the policy and saying, here's what it says. And it doesn't talk about repeat offenders or people where there's real problems. It doesn't limit it in any way. So I look forward to debating this at council and certainly maintaining the position I have. But again, I think what's happening is people are taking something that's written and tailoring it to their own desire to do something. And you know, in my day job, I've seen so many instances where people have authority and they're able to do things and they don't do the right thing. And innocent people get hurt because their names get published. And it's never published that, oh, by the way, we made a mistake, that person didn't commit that offense, they didn't do anything wrong. That's never published, let me tell you. So I'm gonna maintain my position and look forward to debating it more.
Okay, anyone else? Okay, Councillor Sally.
Thank you, Presiding Chair. So to move this forward, because I know I don't have a seconder for what I intended to, so what I'll do is I'll move the motion, which was slightly recommended, I believe, by Councillor Cassidy, which just speaks specifically to publicly releasing enforcement conviction information. So I'll move that, look for a seconder, and then at council, I'll bring an amendment for the additional pieces. So hopefully, at least at minimum, this has been 2 years in the making, and I hope my colleagues can at least support convictions going up.
So can we see a revised motion?
It's up.
Oh. Okay. Anyone wish to speak on this?
Yeah, I do.
Have a second?
you
Councillor Armstrong?
Okay, again, I appreciate what's, you know, the last minute sort of modification, but I think probably this is so important that if anything, I'd like to see everybody on side with this because we all want to do the right thing. We want to make sure the public's protected, the public is informed, and so I really think that this warrants sending it back to staff, having heard what we've said on this issue, and make some revisions. And see if we can come up with something, because I'd like to support this, but I don't want to do things on the fly. Suddenly we're modifying something that's really important, really important. So I'm wondering if there was a motion to refer, that would take precedent over this, am I correct? Yep. So I think we can wait one more cycle. We've waited 2 years. If we're gonna do a law, let's do it right, rather than on the fly. So I'd like to move referral back to staff and see if they can tweak this enough. They all heard what we had to say on the issue. I agree with what Councillor Cassidy wants to do. I'd just like to see us work it a bit so that, you know, there's a balance there. Protect the public, but protect people from finding themselves in a terrible situation. And don't forget, it's not always companies. People's names are involved. That means their family has to wear whatever's being alleged and everything. So it's not just always about one person and a corporation. So I'd like to move referral back for staff to have another look at this and see if they can come up with something that does the right thing. So I'll move that and see if I have support for a referral back.
Do you have that motion?
Yes, I can live with this because I think staff heard our conversation. I guess I'm hoping they'll look at where, first of all, it's not a fishing expedition where people who are perhaps making inquiries as to whether there has been an issue with a landlord property, whatever the case may be, that they're making a legitimate request for information. I don't think, again, I can support just, well, I may be willing to support if there's a conviction, that it be publicly available, but not that we necessarily publish it. So, but I'll leave it with staff to work on that.
So we have a mover, do we have a seconder? No second, no. Ms. Livingston, you have something to say? Yeah.
Yes, and thank you for recognizing me. We would like to be able to do what council is asking us to do, so I would appreciate some clarity on the direction that's being provided. There's been a lot of things that have been discussed this evening, so I would just like to do what we're being asked to do. So publicly release only conviction information. There's, I understand that to mean not if charges have been laid, so I understand that. There are instances where people choose to pay tickets or fines, and then there are instances where people are convicted. So I would just like clarity on the level of information that you would be looking for. I would also appreciate some clarity. We have proposed in the draft policy before you, publication through social media, press release, and on a website. If you're looking to limit that, I would appreciate some clarity on that as well.
Okay, committee, staff has asked for some clarity. You're going to give that? You made the motion?
Well, here's the one thing. So somebody, a landlord, he owns 1,000 units, and he gets a citation and a conviction for an infraction. So, how long, that was today, how long are you going to retain and put out that information? 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years from now? By the way, the internet, let's understand, when people get things put on the internet, quite often, it's forever. It can be shared. It's always there. So I need to understand how long, if a landlord, finds themselves in that situation, are you going to disseminate that they got convicted of not maintaining a fire detector properly? How long would we disseminate that? So I think we need some time frames that maybe after 36 months, it comes off there, So we haven't looked at that. Oh, it's in the report that there's a time frame? Then I have to apologize. 2 years. Okay.
Finished?
Yeah, I'm good with that. I would still think it should be referred back.
Well,
So, but they want clarification from all of us.
okay, I do understand that staff is looking for clarification. I'm going to Ms. Livingston first and then go to our Chief Carboda. Both of you have your hands up.
I apologize, Chair. I was trying to answer the question of how long. So currently what's in front of you says 2 years.
Okay, Chief Carboda, you have something to share?
That was one of my points too. We had 2 years for now, hoping for a suggestion. The other thing I want to clarify, just clarified with Ms. Marshall there, and I was under the wrong impression. Conviction to me meant you went to court. Conviction is you pay the ticket or you perform the work under the inspection order. In essence, you're accepting the fact that you were in violation of the fire code. So I just looking for the clarity part just so we understand what we bring back. And the only other thing I'd like to share is we keep referring to the Oxford Street fire, and so I will refer to that one. If I recall correctly, that fire occurred 2.5 years ago, and the conviction just come down. So today we'd be posting, if this system was in place, a violation that occurred 2.5 years ago. And I can tell you through knowledge that building is owned by a different person today, and it's used for a different purpose. So that's some of the problems when you have these long delays, is that it may not even be the same owner anymore.
Okay, can anyone else add anything to clarify this any further? Otherwise, I'm going to call the motion. Councillor Sally.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I really appreciate the comments from my colleagues. I think, Councillor Squire, he has a position, I totally respect that, and I think the one thing we're probably in agreement is where we stand on some of these pieces, and I think really it's, staff have said these are what they're proposing. Now, whether we decide to move on X, Y, and Z, it seems like Councillor Squire is prepared to make points in his position. I myself am also prepared to make the decision. I don't know what the benefit would be of sending it back to staff because everyone has a different perspective. So it's just going to come back and it's kind of going to look kind of, I don't know, like nothing. So I think we should just vote whether you want something or not. That's fine. I'll live with that. But I know where I am on certain items. So I think that's the best direction forward.
Councillor Cassidy.
Thanks, Mr. Presiding Officer. Having heard that, I agree with Councillor Sully, so I'm going to withdraw my second for the referral.
Okay, do we have another seconder? No. Okay, so we're back to the main motion. Would you kindly replace the main motion? I have one question to ask. I'm going to ask it. Do you feel, Chief Carbode, do you feel comfortable with this, and Ms. Livingston and Mr. Kotofis?
Through the chair, we were asked to bring back a policy that addressed a concern, and it didn't take 2 years, but it did take some time, to be fair. And I think we feel we've done the best in terms of trying to address the concerns of balancing a desire of public interest and transparency with the potential ramifications of publishing such information. So what you see before you is our best effort in that regard. If there is a desire for us to do further work, we're happy to try and do that, but we did spend a fair bit of time trying to work through the details around this.
And Ms. Livingston, at the end of this, is this the motion? Correct. It says releasing enforcement conviction. I want to be sure that I understand what that means. Does this mean that the person has to be convicted, not just charged?
Through the chair, that's my interpretation of that clause at the end.
I saw Mr. Chief Carbode shaking his head in different ways. Could you explain?
No, I tried to explain there. I consult with Ms. Marshall. Maybe she could better define it. But conviction, when I entered into this, was you're in the court and judge convicts you. But it does mean other things, and I'll let her speak to it.
That's not what you've recommended.
Yeah.
It's not what you've recommended.
Yeah.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm just, the recommendation that's up there does not reflect Mr. Cabarda's recommendation on the report. Be a revision.
Through the presiding chair, so the motion, the one thing that has changed was from the staff recommendation is now it's just focused on just the convictions. Everything else still remains as it's a revised policy for publicly releasing enforcement conviction information. And I said that at council, I'll bring an amendment for the original kind of motion itself.
And that's why I'm asking the question. I want to be sure that what we're talking about here is conviction and not charges. So this is after the person is convicted. We're not going to do this before the person is convicted, charged. I'm not sure I'm using the right words, but to me, you charge somebody and then you send them to court and they're found guilty and then they're convicted. So help me understand that.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, conviction would mean convicted by a court of law. So either a ticket could be issued, and if the individual fails to pay the ticket, they could be deemed not to dispute. That is a conviction. It could mean going through a trial, and there's a conviction, or a guilty plea, and there's a conviction. Or paying a ticket out of court, and that's a conviction as well.
Thank you. Okay, we have a motion on the floor. Let's vote. Councillor Helmer, I'm sorry.
I just wanted to advise my colleague, Councillor Slee, that he may recall the number of times where we've tried to introduce amendments that have been deemed to be contrary. And so you may not be able to accomplish what you're trying to accomplish here. You might want to just receive the report and deal with whatever amendments at council. Because if we pass this, it's just going to be coming back to committee, and then it'll come back to council. It'll be a whole cycle wasted, so.
Good advice. Councillor Sally, you heard it, right? You ready to vote or not?
I'll move forward, and I'll just vote against it, and I'll prepare it at council.
Okay, let's vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 3-2.
I'll return control to the chair.
So somehow I voted with Squire on that one, but, so we'll move forward. I believe now we're done number 4. So now that was item number 6, and I believe that was Councillor Usher. So Councillor Usher, I just wanted to make sure, are you going to be a while on this one, or did you want us to move back? Because we have 2 timed items as well, so I'm not sure.
So, Mr. Chair, my question is a very simple one. When I read this, I just want to be sure that we're only talking about the day program, and that's not the overall Dennis administration. It's just the day program, which is a small entity of something that happens during the day. I wanted to make sure that that's what I understood.
Through the chair, this is for the multi-sector service agreement, which is for the day program. The long-term care sector agreement is for the provision of long-term care services in the home. So you're correct. It's only for the day program.
Thank you very much. That's it, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any further speakers? All right, we'll look for a motion to move in second. And call the question. Councillor Squire, do you want to vote manually on this one?
I'm good.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Item number 7, I believe that was Councillor Usher.
Well, Mr. Chair, I hope I'm not digging into this too deeply. I guess my basic question is I don't have a problem with this. It seems as though it's something that we've been using in the past. But is this something that our IT department should be looking at and advising us in any way whatsoever? And have they?
Through the chair, thank you for the question. Yes, this process is something that we need to do in order to bring our software up to date, and our IT folks have been involved in this process as well.
Great, so we'll look for a motion. Any further speakers? So we'll look for a mover and seconder on the screen. And we're voting? Sorry, yep, we're voting.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
So we'll look over to staff because we have an item from London Child and Youth. So Ms. Livingston, the presentation. And she brought her squad with her. And I think there's some people in the crowd.
I brought my reinforcements with me today. Mr. Chair, I'm very happy to be with you this afternoon, and I appreciate the time that you have given us to be able to provide an overview of our new child and youth agenda. You have a couple of speakers with us today, but we also have a number of members in the gallery who are members of our Child and Youth Network. So thank you very much for the time. At its core, this plan, our new Child and Youth Agenda, is about supporting our children, youth, and families to be successful. In 2007, we knew that many of our children and youth in our community were doing well, but we also learned some troubling statistics that highlighted for us that there are a number of children and youth in our families that we are leaving behind, and you can see those statistics in front of you. It is this information that compelled us as a community to take action together and really became the driving force behind our work to improve outcomes for children, youth, and families in our community, and it continues to be that driving force. This is where the Child and Youth Network began, and we went out and also talked to families. We listened to their needs, we heard their aspirations, and in 2008, we developed our first Child and Youth Agenda, which was really our roadmap that took us to 2015, our roadmap for change to try and move some of those outcomes. And while we represent very diverse stakeholders and different organizations, we are held together by a shared vision of happy, healthy children and youth today, caring, responsible adults tomorrow. That vision was developed with families for our families. And since 2007, the CYN's work has had significant impact in London, and that impact has not gone unnoticed by other communities, by other funders, by other levels of government. You will remember that I shared with you that we recently received $2.9 million from the province to build 3 more family centers. The Cowan Foundation, a private foundation, donated $25,000 to our new family center in Westminster. The Ontario Trillium Foundation, Laidlaw Foundation, and McConnell Foundation have invested almost $120,000 in our youth initiatives. And the Kiwanis Club of Forest City London, since we began our work in 2008, has invested over $114,000 in our Baby's Book Bag initiative. So we have investments from government, community funders, and private funders. We've achieved a lot together, but in 2015, we wanted to understand what our impact has been and how we might be able to get better. We conducted a third-party assessment to look at specifically how has our work impacted Londoners and what could we do better together to deepen our impact to try and change those numbers. And we learned a lot about that evaluation. We learned many things, but probably the most important thing we learned is that we have very positive impact for the children, youth, and families that we work with directly. For those that have participated in our projects, our initiatives, we have had a positive impact. But in order to shift those numbers that I just showed you, we need to scale up on those initiatives where we have been able to demonstrate that positive impact. And that is the basis of this plan. So our network has grown significantly since 2007. We have partners from all aspects of our community, from education to not-for-profit to the private sector. And all of the partners whose logos you see on that screen have helped to develop this plan, stand behind this plan, and are excited to be part of the implementation to bring our next Child and Youth Agenda to life. We are a network with a simple goal about supporting happy, healthy children and youth today, and we are also a network who works differently from other communities. There are 2 things that make us different. One, anyone who is interested in doing good things for children, youth, and families in our community is welcome at the table. If you're passionate about this and willing to work hard, you're welcome to be there. But most importantly, what makes us different is we put families at the center of everything we do. We talk with them, we listen to them, we work with them as we develop and implement our plans. Families guide our work. And we do this work through 4 key priority areas. In order to provide more context about each of those areas, I'm going to pass it over to our priority chairs, who will give you an overview of each of these areas. And so I'd like now to be able to introduce you to them. You will know Cheryl Smith very well. She is our interim chair for our Ending Poverty priority. Julie Brandel is our chair of our literacy priority, and Julie has been an active member from the very beginning with our Child and Youth Network through her role at the London Public Library as the coordinator of Children and Youth Services. Anita Gilvasi, who's the executive director of Investing in Children, is the chair of our Healthy Eating, Healthy Physical Activity priority. And then you'll hear from me again as the chair of our Family-Centered Service System priority. Over to you, Cheryl.
Thank you, Lynn. Good afternoon, everyone. We all know that poverty is a complicated social problem, and with complicated problems come innovative solutions. Our vision is for London to reach its full potential by ending poverty in a generation. This vision probably sounds familiar. We have aligned all of our work with London for All, tackling the recommendations that focus on local children and youth. To do this, the CYN partners have developed a dynamic plan that aims to decrease the immediate impact of poverty on Londoners, while at the same time coordinates a strategic approach to impact system change and empowers individuals to break the cycle of poverty. Community partners organize this plan into 4 key strategies: reducing the impact, breaking the cycle of poverty, changing mindsets, and system change. Evaluation from our initiatives has shown that our work is improving outcome for children, youth, and families in London. For example, the Impact Loans Project helped over half the participants exit social assistance. The Food Families Program is helping families save an average of $127 a month on their groceries while learning practical and affordable ways to eat well. But we know to end poverty in a generation, these successes need to be felt more widely. The Ending Poverty Plan is designed to take this work to the next level of impact. For example, this year partners are working on several initiatives, including scaling up the Food Families Program into 13 priority neighborhoods, and scaling up the reach of our Harvest Bucks program by integrating it into neighborhood food depots and more community programs. I'd like to now hand our presentation over to Julie Brandel, the Literacy Chair.
Thanks, Cheryl. Good afternoon. Let me start by saying that literacy is much more than reading and writing. Literacy is that ability to competently and confidently interpret all forms of media so that it's possible to fully participate in our really complex society. I'm sure you would all agree that this is what we want for all of our children, our youth, and our community. Research shows that literacy and poverty rates are strongly linked. Adults with high literacy skills earn roughly 68% more than their peers with low literacy skills. And now recent statistics state that in London, between 20 and 24% of students did not pass their grade 10 literacy test in 2016. And over 20% of students did not graduate from secondary school in 2014. This isn't good enough in London. The CYN impact assessment showed that by us working together, we've made strides in addressing barriers to literacy development through initiatives like Baby's Book Bag, which has helped us reach over 80% of first-time parents to help them read more to their babies. Research clearly shows that this one simple daily activity can impact long-term literacy outcomes. We've developed a really forward-thinking plan that builds connections between the school, the home, and the community. And it's organized into 5 strategies: improving youth literacy, improving literacy in the school-age years, promoting literacy from birth, supporting community partners with professional learning and practices, and also by engaging parents and caregivers to learn more about what literacy actually is. And at the heart of this plan is scaling up the early years initiatives that we've found to be so successful, and also to work alongside young people to find solutions to the barriers that they face every day in achieving their academic success. And our approach is working. Whenever I'm speaking with my library colleagues from around the province, they are amazed by the work that's coming out of our community, and more than a little bit jealous, I have to add. The camaraderie, openness, and collective work happening here is unique to London. It's one of the keys to our success and what continues to make us a leader in this field. Thank you. I'd like to ask Anita Gilvesi, our HEPA Priority Chair, to come up.
Thank you, Julie, and good afternoon, everyone. When we first came together in 2007, the data on childhood obesity was clear and troubling. Today, as echoed in international, national, and provincial reports, statistics are still troubling, but locally, we are starting to see the change. The impact assessment told us that through the work of the CYN, we have seen positive small-scale change in initiatives like the In Motion Community Challenge and the Grade 5 ACTIPASS program. The assessment also indicates a larger scale change. When CYN started, 1 in 4 children in London were overweight or obese. In 2014, that number decreased to 1 in 5. We know that our work has contributed to this positive shift. And through provincial and national work like the Physical Activity Nutrition Report Cards, there is already huge momentum in this area for us to capitalize on moving forward. Research shows that to have impact, our efforts need to be coordinated. The HEPA Action Plan aims to bring the local initiatives taking place in our community under one umbrella, so that we can work together better to improve the outcomes and address local gaps and needs. To do this, we have organized our work into 8 strategic areas as shown on the screen. Our ability to impact community has been recognized by the province and other communities through the Healthy Kids Community Challenge. As you may recall, the Healthy Kids Community Challenge is a 3-year provincially funded opportunity to improve outcomes for children and youth around healthy eating and physical activity. London was one of a handful of communities awarded the maximum amount of funding, over $1 million, because of our demonstrated ability to work collectively through the Child and Youth Network. HKCC has been integrated into the work of the CYN. Now in Theme 3, Choose to Boost Veggies and Fruit, over 50 CYN projects across all priority areas have completed leveraging HKCC support, helping us meet our collective outcomes. Thank you.
So I told you that when we began our work as CYN, we sat down and talked to families. And one of the things that they said to us repeatedly was that our service system was too difficult to navigate. They had to tell their story too many times. They had to go all over our city to access services. And when they got there, it took too long to receive the services. By listening to families and working together differently, CYN partners chose to entirely re-engineer the way we deliver services for families in this community so that we could be more responsive to families' needs and their dreams. And in 2017, what that has led to is the creation of 5 family centers across our community, with 2 more under construction that we hope to see open near the end of the year. These family centers act as our single-door access points that connect children, youth, and families to the local service system in a setting that is comfortable and accessible for them. And we know this approach is working. We conducted an impact assessment in 2014, and a couple of things that we learned is that 90% of families in family center neighborhoods said that services were easier to access, compared to only 59% in non-family center neighborhoods. 81% of families in family center neighborhoods said that the staff in those centers recommended additional services that they needed, compared to only 31% in non-family center neighborhoods. Those are just a couple of the statistics that we learned. And this is very hard evidence that tells us that we are on the right track, that families are having an easier time connecting to the critical services and supports that they need in their neighborhoods. This approach has put us on the map provincially. We are seen as an integration leader across the province. And our work has been featured in a number of reports regarding community hubs and the Ontario Early Years Child and Family Centres. As we move forward in our new plan, we are focusing on two key elements. One is to continue to grow our network of family centres across our community, and the second is to continue to create our integrated family-centered service delivery model across our entire service system. So as you can see, when you've looked at the document and heard our presentation, that we have taken on a large amount of work that will carry us forward for the next 5 years. And it's very important for us to share with you that to make sure that all of this work is leading to the outcomes that we wish to achieve, we asked a group of really smart people in our community who are experts in evaluation to help us in the development of what we're calling a shared measurement framework. And you can see part of that on the screen. What a shared measurement framework does is it brings together, it's a tool that multiple organizations use to measure and evaluate our performance and track our progress towards particular goals. So all of the work that we do in the Child and Youth Network is geared towards these outcomes, and you can see the indicators that we are using to measure it. This is every single strategy connects to these things. And so we are working even more together on how and be able to measure our progress. So this is going to allow us to continue to learn and course correct as we need to. It allows us to work better together, and it catalyzes us for even more action. Fundamentally, what this tool allows us to do is understand what progress we're making towards our outcomes and helps us to understand how we can get better. Over the course of many months of planning, CYN partners came together and brought their very different perspectives, backgrounds, and interests to the table. We created what we believe to be an innovative and forward-thinking agenda based on the knowledge of our community that we can only get to the outcomes we wish to achieve by working together. The agenda is about leveraging the very best of our community and supporting the needs of families to spark transformative change across our city. It's about using evidence. It's about building on 10 years of relationship building and the collective knowledge of over 100 organizations on how we can scale up and deepen our impact across our city. And most importantly, this agenda is about families, and it's about supporting our children and youth to be successful. This is why we're here, and this is what we are committed to do. Thank you very much for your time, and we'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much, and I believe there's a speakers list. Councillor Usher, and I'll look for any other speakers.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I am so happy. I can't use another word, but I'm mesmerized, to be honest with you, and I'm so grateful because I remember when this started. I think, I may be wrong, but I think it started with, what was the gentleman's name at the Board of Education that did the 3-year study from the province?
Mr. Chair, I believe Councillor Usher is referring to Charles Pascal, who was the special advisor to the Premier on Education.
I think that perhaps, and I may be wrong about this, but this really, at least it's begun to accelerate about that time. And we've moved very well. I don't want to say slowly, I don't want to say fast over the years, but I think that we've reached a state now where we're much better off. And when I say we, I'm talking about our children and our society and our community, much better off than we were those days. I think personally, I still think that we have a long way to go. But what you presented here was certainly very inspiring from my perspective, because I feel that in the next 4 years, we have a map drawn out to where we want to go and where we're going to get to. And I believe it's going to be very helpful. My personal feeling about this, and this comes from experience more than knowledge, is that poverty is a devastating thing that we need to conquer one way or another. And sometimes we can't do it fast, but we could do it one little bit at a time. And sometimes it's only one person at a time. But I think that the map that you've drawn out here I think that that's going to help. And I really do believe that to become a better person, you got to move out of poverty, and I'm talking about people in poverty. You got to come out of poverty, and you got to get that literacy part. You've got to get that education, because that is the thing. Just dealing with the poverty by itself is not going to work. So you got to deal with the poverty and the education, and combined with that is the health. Ms. Livingston and I talk about the nutrition aspect of this, and I think we have to be sure that that kids today have enough energy to be able to pay attention, to be able to focus, to be able to learn what is being offered to them, whether it's the world around them, or whether it's via teaching, or whether it's via the computers, or whatever. So I want to say, Mr. Chair, that I won't be elaborate on this, because I don't want to steal the thunder from these folks who made such a wonderful presentation. I'll say such a sensational presentation. How about that? But I do want to thank them very much. Now, in the future, I'm sure you're going to come back to us on a yearly basis, as you generally do. It will be very inspiring to see a progress. If there are some numbers or some way that you could identify those, because I would really like to see, you mentioned, for example, that at the beginning, we couldn't even pass, I think it was grade 7 or grade 8, or the grade was lower than other places. I'd like to see us get higher than that, you know. But I do remember the days when people did not really care to even go to high school. Now, I can't find somebody who doesn't want to go to university. In other words, everybody have this ambition to finish elementary school and then go into high school and finish high school. And they're not thinking about going to work, they're thinking about college or university. And I think that that's really, really good for our society and our world. So I praise you for participating in that and playing a part in that. And I want to take this opportunity to, first of all, thank you for the presentation. Thank you for the thoughts that you put into this, and thanks to all the people, because I know you have a lot of volunteers, some who are not even here. I want to make sure that they understand that I and us are very grateful to the time you put into this. And that lady who chose me as her adopted counselor from the Child and Youth Network, I just want her to know that I'm still available whenever she wants to chat and teach me some more. Thank you.
Councillor Squire.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I just want to congratulate you on the work. When I look at it, it's a monumental amount of work, and bringing it all together and from different areas and having all these partners involved, it's huge, and I really appreciate the work you've done. And I think what you're doing is moving the responsibility for children and youth back to a community-based system that we're all responsible. I know when I was a kid many years ago, growing up was very community-based. There was a parks program. You spent the summer with your friends in your community, and we all took care of each other to some extent. My wife and I like to say when we raised our kids, raising children was more of a competitive sport based on what you could achieve, what hockey team your child played on, that sort of thing. So any movement back to a community-based system, I think, is great. And I'm really glad you've got measurements for whether you'll succeed or not. So I just want to understand that fully. I take it you've created benchmarks now of where we are now, and that we'll have reports coming back on a regular basis to see if we've moved those numbers at all. Is that what I'm understanding?
Through the chair, yes, that's exactly it. So we do have baseline for all of these currently. And we will be tracking them as we move forward. Some of them you could anticipate that we do get those numbers on a regular basis, annual basis, some we do not. So we have always produced a progress report for CYN every year. for many, many years. What our progress reports will now entail is information on where we sit in terms of our shared measurement framework. This is a significant piece of work because what it means is that also all of us who provide services, like me through recreation, I'll be looking to these kinds of numbers as well in terms of what am I doing to contribute to that.
The last thing is, if you don't move some of those numbers, don't give up. I think it's really, I think it's really important to understand that you may not move some of those numbers today, tomorrow, or the next day, but that doesn't mean your work isn't important and that you're not doing the right thing. So it may mean a little bit of adjustment and that sort of thing, but I really believe you're on the right track. I think this is comprehensive, and I wish you the best of luck with it, and I hope to hear back from you soon. So congratulations.
Councillor Brown Holston and Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you very much, and through the chair, again, congratulations. What's really exciting is the data that shows you've correctly identified the problems and are making a difference in those. So that's wonderful, because then you're sure to have a progress report that actually shows progress, and that's what we're all hoping for. Thank you.
Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I just want to add my congratulations and thanks to everyone. I've known about the CYN for a long time now, and I've always been amazed at the work that you do. And anytime I've had the pleasure of meeting anyone who's affiliated with CYN, I've always been very impressed. I think what you've done and what you've shown is just further proof of the approach that London as a community is moving towards, the idea of collaboration and cooperation and greater integration, and the idea of that you have been measuring your success all along. And one of the recommendations from London for All is build on what we know is working. Do more of it. I think it says pretty simply, do more of what we know is working and do less of what isn't working. And so I love that you have these little pilots that have shown the success that they've shown, and now you're going to expand on them. And I think that's wonderful. And the fact that every dollar we are contributing it is leveraged for more dollars from other places, from other levels of government, and from some of the organizations that are involved in CYN. So it's putting their money where their mouths are, because they believe in it. They're involved in it, they're working, and so they're putting funding towards it as well. And the idea of measuring, as Ms. Livingston has said, I know you've been measuring all along. I know we've seen progress and success all along, and so continuing to measure. And hopefully, as these programs are expanded, we'll see the success expand exponentially as well. So I'm excited by this. I'm proud of the work that you've done, and congratulations and thank you.
Any further speakers? And so I'll look for a motion on the screen to receive that, but I just wanted to say on behalf of the committee, thank you so much for that presentation, and thank you for the team down here, and I know there's many people up there as well, so thanks and congratulations. So moved in second, we'll call the question. And we're voting.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
And Ms. Livingston is back up again. Come on down. We're speaking about item number 9.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's a big day for Neighborhood Children and Fire Services, so I appreciate your indulgence of the committee time. We're just going to call.
And meanwhile, thank you so much. I see the people leaving. Thank you for waiting out, and really appreciate you guys all coming.
Is it this?
And we'll get that up in the meanwhile on the screen. And we'll get a sports update from Councillor Squire. Sports update from Councillor Squire.
Sorry, I apologize. We just needed to get set up. So again, thank you through the chair for your time this afternoon. I am very pleased to be able to share the presentation on our London Strengthening Neighbourhood Strategy 2017 to 2020 with three of our very notable neighbourhood leaders. So I have with me this afternoon, I'm sure they don't need introduction, but I'll do it anyway. Sandy Levin from the Orchard Park Sherwood Forest Ratepayers Association, Wes Kinghorn from Urban League of London, and Katie Stewart of Old East Village Community Association. And we are very happy to share the presentation on the Strengthening Neighbourhood Strategy. So the presentation, we're just going to talk a little bit about where this has come from. It's important to understand it came from some good neighborhood work over the years. And there is a very deep connection to your strategic plan in terms of where we go next. We'd like to highlight for you the Strengthening Neighborhoods development process that was used for the development of this strategy, and then there'll be a high-level overview of the plan that takes us through to 2020. So back in 2008, the City of London did something they hadn't done before, and that was issue a broad call to residents who were interested in participating on a task force about what strong neighborhoods meant. And we were very pleasantly surprised that over 100 of residents came forward to participate in that work. And what that group of people did was develop our first LSNS strategy. It included a vision for all London neighborhoods of what makes a strong neighborhood. It had 14 elements of how you would develop a neighborhood from a people perspective and a places perspective, and it detailed a 5-year implementation plan. What that original plan led to is many things that you now come to know as commonplace. It led to the Sparks Neighborhood Matching Fund, our Adopt a Park program, neighborhood event booking, movie night, neighborhood safety audit, and many more things. But what it also did was change the way we work as a city with neighborhoods. And in December 2015, we were able to come together as a community and celebrate the completion of that original plan, and with the vast majority of those strategies accomplished. That's what set the stage for what then this council established as a direction in terms of moving forward in your council strategic plan. And specifically, LSNS was identified as part of the strengthening our community area of focus, where strong neighborhoods are vibrant, connected, and engaged, and form the backbone of a diverse, inclusive, and welcoming community. We know that London Strengthening Neighborhood Strategy really empowers residents to work with the city, to do what they'd like to see happen in their neighborhoods, and create healthy, safe, and accessible places. But council was very clear about where this should go next in terms of the council strategic direction, and providing direction that we look at how do we further support neighborhood-driven activities and neighborhood decision-making. So we moved forward with that, but it's important to understand that the vision that was established in our initial work and the core principles around how we work still stay true today. This vision still matters in terms of London Strengthening Neighborhood Strategy, and our core principles are still what guides this work. And there's just a few that I would like to highlight because they're significant. One is that stronger neighborhoods are about every neighborhood in our community so that everyone can have an improved quality of life, and London is better when all of our neighborhoods are engaged. The other key principle is that residents lead this change. Our role at the city is to facilitate and support, but this is a resident-driven strategy. And also that this strategy would build on the work that occurred in the past plan, but it represents and continues to represent that collaborative effort of community stakeholders, organizations, businesses, and staff from across the city, again, changing the way we have worked in terms of how we work with neighborhoods differently, that all of us are engaged in terms of how we move forward to support neighborhoods in terms of what they'd like to see happen. So I'm now going to turn it over to Mr. Levin in terms of walking you through the process that was followed for the development of this plan.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you, Chair and committee members. And I want to say up front, when I came into this process, I was a little skeptical. But at the end of the process, I'm really enthusiastic about this. Because your staff did a great job of working with communities, working with people, and going through a process that tested what they heard at each step, which frankly is a really good process and a model for others. They started off by talking to or sending out information to neighborhood and ratepayer associations. So my executive got together and responded to an open-ended survey. You know, we were kind of wondering, what's this all about? Where's this going to lead? But we believe in participating. We believe our neighborhood is strong and it's important to participate in strengthening neighborhoods across the city. Then your staff went out and talked to people. They did surveys. They sat down with people. They even did surveys online, and I gotta caution you, online surveys can often be gamed and are gamed and often come out with information that's not really good, whether it's on the city website or the London Free Press website. But, and here's the important part, your staff didn't stop and say, hey, we got the answers. They wanted to test if what they heard made sense. Then they went and rounded up what sometimes gets to be called the usual suspects, those of us who are neighborhood leaders. And they turned to the Urban League and their other sources to gather 23 different groups to sit down through 3 sessions to look at what came out of the process and test it to see, does it make sense? And the nice thing about that was your staff were there to listen. They didn't come with predetermined notions. They didn't say to us, hey, we're the experts. They said, we know you're in your neighborhoods, you're working hard. And they did a lot of really good things during these sessions. Most importantly, they fed us. They also provided excellent facilitation without a single expensive consultant in the room. And, as I said, they didn't have a predetermined outcome. And at the end of that, when they had something to take away from those sessions, they didn't stop there either. They held 4 open houses in the 4 quadrants of the city and invited people to come and provide feedback to, again, test if what they heard made sense to a larger group of people. So my compliments are to staff. You have a really excellent group of people, and you have an excellent product that's come out of this process. And my colleagues from the Urban League and from Old East will get into more detail. Oh, I'm sorry, I have one slide I have to do, which is the other way. Which is what we will talk about today is what came out of that process. And there's 4 themes, and my colleagues will talk about those 4 themes in a little more detail.
Hey everyone, I'm Wes Kinghorn, president of the Urban League. I'm not sure if all of you know, though, before that, for many, many years, I was actually the chair of the Woodfield Community Association for over a decade, actually. So I came through this quite naturally to where I am right now. And I can say that if something like this had been in place back then, it would have made my life a lot easier. The opportunities that we're seeing come before us now are spectacular. And I have to echo what Sandy said. This was real engagement. This was, what I love is that the engagement started with, we were talked to as the Urban League, which is great because we are a body that holds under our umbrella most of the neighborhood associations in the city, and we're attempting more and more to fold in other types of groups as well. But more importantly, then they went past us and they went to the actual on-the-ground neighborhood leaders and talked to them specifically. And what may be even more important to that is they went past those known neighborhood leaders and went straight to the people in the city. And I think that's what made this process so strong. And you can see before you the first theme, which is engagement in neighborhoods. And one thing I want to draw your attention to is what's so important here is it was increasing awareness of resident-identified neighborhoods. So often we sort of default to planning districts and these ideas that citizens just have no idea or no love for or no attachment to. And we work within those constraints because they're legally defined areas. And when you move to working with a neighborhood, it's very difficult for staff. It's very difficult for the Urban League because neighborhoods, their beauty is they move, they change. They're defined by the people who live there. And what I love about this process is that it started with that. It started by saying we're looking at resident-identified neighborhoods. So that was spectacular. And they're going to work with groups like ours, and we'll be with you all the way along. The Urban League does have a network. We have a long-standing relationship since 1968 with many of these neighborhoods, and we'll continue to help you wherever we can. But the process is working well. The next one, actually, I'll pass it off to Katie.
Hello, counselors. Oh, great. So the second theme that we discovered after doing a lot of discussions was improving communication. And we kind of broke that down in a few different ways. So the first way we saw was that we could see improvement in coordination of communication within and amongst neighborhoods. We actually found when all of the community associations were working together, there were a lot of ideas that one community association had that the other wasn't aware of and vice versa. So even this process allowing us to kind of work with each other and discover new ways of doing things and ways to share information, the strategy works to continue to improve that. The second one is the increase and improved communication between the City of London and residents. So we actually thought of a lot of really grassroots ideas that could help the city, one being developing an app that would be neighborhood specific for people to sign up for so they can get notifications about planning meetings, community events, things like that. Oftentimes with community associations, we try as hard as we can to get all of those notices out door to door, but we're looking for other ways to kind of engage our residents and for the city to engage residents. The third one was increase and improve communication between the City of London and neighborhood associations. So one idea that we had kind of come up with was that we have an annual event where neighborhood associations, staff, city councilors would be invited, where we talk about our communities, how can we improve them, what's working, what's not working. We felt that that would be a really great opportunity for all stakeholders involved to improve. So the next theme we found were tools and resources to support neighborhoods. So I'm sure you get lots of people coming up to you asking for resources, funding, et cetera. We're no different. So we're looking for ways that we can do what we do in a sustainable way with assistance through resources, funding. One of the ways that we had talked about was that we want to help all of our neighborhood associations access resources within our communities. Does that mean a shared storage space? Does that mean having a virtual hub where we can sign out tools and equipment and assets that the city has? Ways to kind of really bring everything together so all the community associations can have access to them. Another point was that growing the Sparks funding program. We felt that this program is amazing and we want this to continue to be better. Maybe doing more resident-driven decision-making with where the funding goes and trying to maybe have the funding expand further than 1 year for one event. So those are my themes there, and I'm handing it back over to Wes. Thank you for your match.
So the fourth and final theme was the overarching strategies. And what's really critically important here, you can see, is that it involves broadening engagement with diverse communities. And I think that that's something to highlight here. The Urban League is working with this as well right now. Our board was not diverse, and we have attempted over the last year and been quite successful in changing that. And our community associations, by nature, of course, they're long-standing associations. They've been around for a long, long time. People hand the keys of the association off to a friend. This sort of issue exists within communities themselves. And they recognize it. In fact, we've had a seminar with the city recently where we brought community leaders out and talked about how we could bring more diversity into our neighborhood associations. Because, you know, the focus on neighborhood is important. Geography counts. But so far, we haven't layered that very well with the other communities that we have in this city that go beyond those neighborhoods. And it's nice to see that that's an explicit implicit part of this process. Because again, it's something the League's working on. Over the summer, we have it as one of our top priorities. And the city is recognizing it as well. It's not always easy, but it's important, and it's nice to see it recognized. And they have many ways that they're going to do this by developing resources in various languages, increasing awareness in neighborhood groups of organizations who are settling people, and so forth. These ways that we'll be able to take that geography and deepen the connection to all of the citizens of London. And again, they have annual reports on progress, which are important, as you can see, and evaluation is such a critical part of this. And they'll be working with groups like ours and the neighbors themselves to see how this is working. So finally, the implementation plan, and this is, of course, the most critical element. How is this implemented? How does this hit the ground? And here again, there's been great work. This is a fundamentally resident-driven strategy, and that's, again, important. So this engagement has been so rich because at the end of the tunnel, residents saw that they would still be involved. They would actually be actively engaged in the implementation of this plan. So the first steps, of course, are going to be a citywide rollout of the neighborhood decision-making in the multi-year budget, which will invest finances in these neighborhoods themselves, and the new neighborhood event fund, which will support small neighborhood and community events. And I can say, I don't know if you're aware of this, but over this past year, there has been a massive increase in the number of neighborhood associations in the city. I think 9 new neighborhood associations have sparked up over the last year. Many of them have already joined the League. A couple of them are on the side. It's owed in large part to the efforts of the city to get the word out and to help strengthen the ability for these neighborhoods to come together. So this is already happening. But what we always say is that, you know, in the past, neighborhood associations often came together to fight something. There was a development they didn't like. There was a problem in the neighborhood. So a community association would form over an issue, a flashpoint issue. And the trouble with that is when that issue disappears, you're left looking at each other and saying, why are we all together? Like, why did we form? But when you build it around events, when you build a community around the events, it holds you together for years. Those events go on, and as long as they do, you have to pass the keys to the next group. And when those problems arise, it works. We have a group ready to land. So anyways, I'm just thrilled to see that that's the approach we're taking right out of the gate. Thank you very much.
And I'll just end with our last slide, which is, while we have 3 of our neighborhood leaders with us today, there were 20 others that helped in the development of this plan, and I would like you to know who they are. And so we've listed their names for you, and we're passing on a huge thank you for their work and contribution to this plan. So that's the end of our presentation, and we'd be pleased to answer any questions you might have.
Councillor Usher?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, thanks again. I have no idea how you do this. You twist your mouth one side for one presentation, then you twist it the other side for another presentation. That's the only way that I could think. You must have some kind of a brain up there that could shift from, because these 2 presentations, they're so important and they're so family-oriented, so community-oriented that, you know, for me, it's difficult to pull them apart. But yet I have to separate them sometimes, just like how you have to separate them. But when I look at them as an individual out in the community, I see something that the city is doing for our children and our neighborhood and thus our families. So I really appreciate the presentation. And I appreciate the people who participated in this. I remember the first few meetings that we had. I think I was chair of CAPS at the time. And the room was packed full of all these families from all over. They couldn't even find standing room. I thought the security was going to come and kick us out of there and say we needed a bigger room. And I think it has grown tremendously since then. Not only has it grown, but the ideas have grown and the contribution has grown. The plan has grown. And I think you're moving forward. I like very, very much all the initiatives that you have provided here, the strategies, the themes, and the initiatives to complete them. I like the fact that you're empowering all these, the individuals, because I think that that's important. You can't just give orders. You've got to empower them to do things, and each neighborhood will be different. You did mention about the diversity, and I'm just hoping, it's a hope, that we can encourage people of of different ethnic origin to come together within the neighborhood. I know that sometimes we want to cluster among our own culture somewhere else rather than a neighborhood, but we could live both. We could live I live in a neighborhood and I live among my culture also. So I think that that's something that we need to be able to achieve. The other thing that I have here is the communication. Communications always bother me, and especially when I look at the BRT scenario, the way we did so much work to it, and we thought we had it all covered, and then boom, all hell broke loose, and we had to go through it all over again. It's as though we had to go to a complete audience, a complete new audience, and yet we picked up a whole lot more people who we talked to, and today I'm still meeting people who are saying, I didn't hear anything about it. I didn't know about it. I didn't go to any meetings and all this. So I think communications will be very important, and I just hope, I read all the communication plans you have here, and I'm not going to add anything to it because I'm not an expert at it, but I think that we've got to get out there. Let me just give you an example. There are many, many neighborhoods within the city that still are not aware of this and still are not, they're not grabbing it. And I think that they should. I think that it's so good for the city that ultimately, if we could get 50% of the neighborhoods, we would be well on our way. And I think it spreads from one person to another and from one neighborhood to another. So thanks again. I certainly appreciate this, and keep up the good work, and I look forward to the next report when you come forward. I always enjoy these reports when you present them. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Squire and Councillor Morgan.
Thank you very much, through you, Chair. Thank you very much for the report. I have a question, and it's probably for some of the community leaders. One of the challenges when you're a councillor is making sure that you're hearing from community associations that have a fulsome process for getting the views of their residents. For instance, I have, I think, 5 or 6 different community associations in Ward 6. Of those, maybe 1 or 2 actually have annual meetings or that sort of thing. So when my concern always is how are we making sure the community associations are using best practices, having annual meetings, canvassing their residents before they come to me and say, this is how our community feels. And then with the Urban League, I'd also like to know, how do you do that? How do you make sure that when you express an opinion, that I know you've had broad input from a number of community associations? Because people don't come here and say, this is the position of of an association, and here's what we did to make sure it's an accurate view. So maybe you could help me with that.
It's a complex arrangement. Neighborhoods are different and they vary. Some neighborhood associations, of course, when they all start, they're so small, right? Their first year is always the 5 or 6 people who meet and want to start something good in their neighborhood. One thing I will say, though, is that the League is actively aware of this, and we happen to be in a bit of a renaissance at the moment where we have been working with the city again to hold seminars for our leaders to talk about good governance, to talk about should you incorporate, to talk about how often should you and how should you reach out to the entire neighborhood so that they're aware of your existence and they have an equal opportunity to be represented on your board. We are going to be moving forward with these ideas and making sure that our various communities are aware that the more that you can show this to council, the more that you can say, we annually hold a meeting, and at that meeting we have advertised to everyone at the community that they have an equal opportunity to stand on our board. That gives you more strength of knowing that, yes, these people do in some way represent the neighborhood at large. Even when they're 5 people, though, of course, they're 5 engaged people, and they're people who do have their ear to the ground, and you'll hear from the neighborhood if they haven't been properly represented. I'm sure you'll directly hear around the association from time to time, and that's fair as well. Neighborhoods should be heard directly, and neighbors should be heard directly as well. From the Urban League perspective, we are a board, and we make board decisions. We're voted in by our membership. Each of our member groups, 30-something at the moment, has a vote on who sits on that board. We do hold an annual general meeting. At the annual general meeting, our past actions of the year ahead are critiqued, and if people decide that we haven't done a good job, they can boot us out and put somebody else in our place. So that's the way that we do it. It's nearly impossible with such a large and diverse membership to, and nor should we, poll on every single decision that we make. We're elected to make decisions in the best interests of our neighborhoods, to present those decisions to you as a council, and then we're judged at the next AGM on how well we've done that for the past year. We do, though, have a very deep engagement structure. I think some of you are aware of it, that we, on any issue that we speak to, we generally hold an open Pints and Politics meeting, bring everybody out to that. And then at the end of the month, we often hold a debate with experts on both sides, and we're always very balanced. We make sure that both sides of any issue are represented. We, again, invite our membership out to that. And then I'll hear from them. You know, I'll hear from them as to what their opinion is on what they've just heard. And we'll listen to them openly in the room before we come forward with statements. So I hope that gives you a little snapshot of how we work. Yeah.
Councillor Morgan? Councillor Squire?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that's, for me, that's very valuable, because it's hugely important to know that if somebody's purporting to be representing a community, that they're doing their due diligence to make sure that that's accurate, because it is important, because we rely on community associations. Without them, it's impossible to get to every person. So I think it's great, and that work you just indicated is very valuable.
Councillor Armstrong and Councillor Morgan.
I'm glad Councillor Squire brought up this issue, because I think it is an important issue. Community associations are really important, and of course they, as you said, spring up when issues come up, and when issues die, they sometimes disappear. I've been a member prior to being elected of a community association that was very active and you know, led to a lot of good things happening in the community, and I was glad to be a part of that, and we did some really good things way back when. But I guess one thing I sort of find with, you know, I have a community association in my area, and what I find is that, you know, quite often I find that what things councillors should be doing, I'm finding the community association is running parallel and opposite to what the councillor's doing. And you know, and of course everyone should say work together and that sort of thing. But what I'm finding is that in my particular area, that the community association has gotten political, and very political, and it's problematic, because I understood community associations should be championing, you know, improvements in the community, getting information out there, you know, and working together and everything. And I'm finding that more and more not the case. And I don't see that. I don't see, and I think you probably may be somewhat aware of the issue, or maybe you're not. But I think the thing is, you know, I think with community associations, councillors should work with them, and we should be working together. And I shouldn't find people basically as a small group acting as a councillor. You know, they aren't elected by the people, and they shouldn't be sort of, you know, crossing that line. And I don't know if you're getting where I'm coming from on this. I hope you are. But I think the Urban League, because of all these groups and what you know, what you're an oversight body now, sort of, and an advisory body, that really you need to develop some code of conduct, some guidelines that these groups need to follow, so that those lines aren't drawn, unless you're telling me that, and I'd like to hear from you on this, that, and of course we have the former Councillor Levin here, he would understand this very well, that there's a balance between, you know, what a community association should be doing and what is councillors' work. And the two, the one shouldn't be doing the other. So if you could give me some feedback, your thoughts, I'd like to hear from the former councillor on this one, how he feels about it.
Councillor Armstrong, just before you answer, just if they choose to answer, that's fine, but I just wanted to make sure, because the question was kind of somewhat political for them, and I don't know if they feel comfortable answering that. So I'll just leave that with them.
Well, he can answer whatever they feel comfortable with, but I think they know what I'm talking about. It goes right along with what they think Councillor Squire was sort of. No? Okay, then it's opposite. It's opposite. There you go. We're opposite. There's a perfect example.
Mr. Chair, I'll try to answer Councillor Armstrong's question. I think it really depends on the neighborhood association. And they're not charities, so they're not restricted to political activities. And there are people with strong opinions who may represent the executive and have a different point of view than their councillor. And I think that's fair for people to have. In our association, though, we try to be really apolitical in the sense that we don't take positions as much on, we don't say Councillor Squire is doing X and you should go against that. In fact, I got kind of berated a little bit in my regular newsletter to citizens that I took a position on the ranked balloting and had one resident say, "Don't do that, Sandy, you don't do that. And haven't done it before, why'd you start?" Okay, ooh, thanks. But, you're not going to prevent people who are active in a community from deciding whether or not their representative is speaking on their behalf in a way they see you speaking on their behalf. My work as a neighborhood representative for a number of years now is to work with the elected councillor and try to get the best outcomes for my neighborhood. And what I find personally is if we have a difference of opinion on an issue, we can talk about it. It doesn't change the fact that we have a good working relationship. I'm not fully aware, Councillor, through the chair, as to the kind of work that is councillor work versus community work. I guess I'm in a fortunate position because I've been in your seats and I'm still, I know people like Mr. Katolik when I was on council, which reminds me how long we've been around. And I worked with you, Councillor, when we were both on council together and also with Councillor Usher. So I'm in a unique position to be able to do what might be considered councillor work, to say, I'm going to go and talk to Mr. Katolik and find out how we could deal with that issue. Or I'm going to talk to Mr. Matthews at Western about a student housing issue. I'm not going to go to Councillor Squire with that when I have a way of dealing with it. And frankly, if I can help somebody in my neighborhood know who to talk to within the city structure, I think everybody benefits, whether it's the councillor or the individual or the neighborhood association. So, I guess I've been lucky to be able to have that kind of relationship. And I think if Councillor Squire and I didn't have that, I think we'd have a sit down. We try to thrash that out. Probably call in my executive of our association to join in on that meeting and see how we could make a difference that's good for everybody in the neighborhood. That's the goal. We want strong, healthy neighborhoods.
I think Mr. Kinghorn wanted to say something real quick.
I have a very privileged position in neighborhoods in the city because of my role. I'm in constant contact with almost all of them, right? And I will say, if it gives you any promise, I actually see the opposite happening in the city right now. Neighborhoods have become more the conduits for some of the best things happening in London, the street fairs and the block parties and the cultural events and the musical events. That's actually shifted to become the primary focus of our neighborhood associations. Of course, from time to time, something will happen, and that's the beauty of them too. I love it when they come together and disagree with me, and I'm sure as councillors you like to hear those voices too, because we want to hear from them and we want to be challenged. But if it gives you any sort of better feeling about it, it's they're much more about positive change in the community than they are about political moves, I would say.
Thank you. So I just want to remind you folks that we just have a PPM that's also on here as well.
I'll be brief, and I like when it works that way, and there's events spring up through groups getting together and all that, but, you know, when I find, for an example, somebody saying, call us to deal with a pothole, rather than call the counselor, and that's a simple example, and I'm simplifying, but seriously, that becomes a bit of an issue, because if things don't get dealt with, then of course, and there's 1,000 other examples, then of course people wonder, why is this happening in my community? Why are these problems? Well, a counselor may not know about it. And that shouldn't be happening. That's a pretty straightforward thing. And so I understand what you're trying to do and what's being accomplished. I just like to see more of that, and people, sort of counselors are left to do
I'm
their.
gonna ask for a point of order here.
Go ahead, Councillor Usher.
I'm really sorry about this, I'm really sorry about this, but I think we're straying too far from this program. We got a presentation here from visitors, and we're way over here with politics, you know? This isn't very nice. So could we just stay on the subject?
Thank you, you know, and I appreciate my colleagues' comments, and I'm finished. I think I've sort of heard from the group, and I appreciate what you've done.
Thank you, Councillor Morgan.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for letting me speak at your committee. This is the report I actually came here for tonight. And one of the things that, I know that I'm not known to be someone who gets really excited about all things municipal, except for tax policy, maybe. But this is one of them that I have been. Have been very active on, have really, you know, tried to make a difference on, have tried to, you know, influence our strategic plan on, and the work that's been done here, I think is phenomenal. And really this, you know, Neighborhood Strategy 2.0, I think really builds on what has been done before and takes it to the next level to move it forward. You know, I'm so excited about many things in here, but I'll tell you, I'm not even on this committee, but I'll be at the June meeting because of the trailer here that you've included in the presentation about community decision-making coming back in June, because I think that's definitely a very exciting part of how we can really empower our neighborhoods. And so that's exciting too. And so thank you to everybody who was involved in the development of this strategy. I think it's an excellent strategy, and I think it's going to do a lot for neighborhoods. For all the things that have happened since the last strategy, I think it will take, you know, us, you know, so far into the future, we're not even going to recognize where we were. And so I appreciate the work that's been done on that. With that, and I apologize, I'm supposed to be somewhere 1 minute ago. I did also come because of something in the strategy that I wanted to try to improve. And it's not with the strategy, but it's with the success of the strategy being a little too successful this particular year. And that is, you heard a number of times the movie nights mentioned, and there's been a number in my wards. I know they've come across the city. They started in 2015, and there were 7 of them, and they drew about 600 people, so just under 100 people going to each of these movie nights. And in 2016, 10 were funded, 3 provided their own licenses, and just under 1,300 people attended, so almost 100 people per movie night. And you were talking about nights that are run by communities, community associations, and individuals in the community that draw out hundreds of other residents over the course of the summer. And I was talking about promoting this upcoming year, and through my discussions with staff a couple weeks ago, I found out that we booked them all for 2017. We doubled it, in fact, and it's 20 movie nights and 2 providing their own license. And there's now a wait list for doing these. And the reason why there's a wait list is because we don't have enough equipment to actually run every night during the summer. And this is, again, one of the things that is core. I mentioned in the strategy multiple times under theme 3. And I think we could solve that problem very quickly if we simply added the authorization, and I passed along some wording to the committee for consideration, to simply fund an additional movie kit of up to $20,000 from the Community Investment Reserve Fund. It's a fund that is for investing in community events. It is a known quantity, and what that up to $20,000 gets us is a complete additional full movie kit, which is the screen and the laptop and the projector and the little trailer and the power cords and all the things included in that. I know in speaking with Ms. Livingston and her staff, they'd certainly be able to accommodate the additional staff members, and that would get an additional 10 movie nights throughout the summer, because there'd be an additional kit. And I hope the committee, although I can't make a motion, would consider doing that. And I know that we like to do things with a lot of time in front of it, but I would like us to consider doing this right away, because the clock is ticking on when these movie nights start, and it would be great to let community associations, particularly those on the wait list who would like to have a movie night, know that we can support that by purchasing some additional equipment. So I don't have the ability to make a motion, but I certainly would like the committee to consider that, adding a C that would provide that authorization to Ms. Livingston and her staff to purchase an additional movie kit out of the Community Investment Reserve Fund, so that hundreds more Londoners can enjoy movies through the summer.
Thank you, Councilor Morgan. I see it's already been moved and seconded, moved by Councilor Armstrong. So look for any speakers on the motion that's in front of us, I guess. Councilor Cassidy was on the list, and then Councilor Squire, my bad.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not going to speak to the C yet, because I haven't had time to even digest that. I just want to add my comments about the presentation and some of the information that we learned from these wonderful community leaders that have come here before us today. I want to comment on something that Mr. Kinghorn said about a lot of times community groups start from a planning issue. I know it's been the case in Ward 5 and in particular in my own neighborhood. And one of the benefits of starting with a bang is you don't have 5. You don't start out with just 5 people. You start out with a really big group. But the challenge, I agree, is keeping the community engaged going forward. But at the same time, I know of like 3 large community organizations in Ward 5. What I think tends to happen is they sort of go dormant for a while, and then you have that group of 5 that stay connected. And I think with modern technology, with email and social media, it's easier now for a dormant group to reactivate, which has just happened recently in the Stony Brook Heights over 420 Fantail Park Road, which we talked about at planning last night. That's a group that was started by Joni Beckler like 100 years ago. And
Joni's that old. She's older than you.
A very long time ago, and that group has the core group has stayed. They have representation on the Urban League. I know that. The other groups in my ward don't have active membership in the Urban League. So I just want to get some information on how communication on some of this strategy goes out to all of the community organizations, and not just the ones that are connected with the Urban League. So I know that there are mailings that go out on certain citywide planning things or things like that. They'll go to whoever's identified as the leader of the community organization. But this kind of information on this strengthening neighborhood strategy, is that getting sent out to everybody that's been identified?
Through the chair, we have sent it to everybody we know about. We've worked with Urban League and anybody we know about. But what you'll notice in the strategy under communication is the need to get better on this front. So there's a couple of actions here around a web application and other tools that will help the city be better at communicating, but also help neighborhood organizations communicate within their own neighborhood. That was a really big point of discussion in the development of our plan. And it is not just about us needing to share information about LSNS. We heard lots about how we share planning information and all sorts of other information from a city perspective, with some very helpful ideas on how we could get better at that. So you'll see that right in the plan, and that's one of the steps we need to take.
Thank you. So just to follow up on that, I think that's great. And again, with the email lists that a lot of these groups now have compiled, I can see this information being able to be disseminated within the community and throughout the community. I also just wanted to mention, one of the benefits of having a community organization, whether it's, dormant or active, is I think when we talk about empowering communities, it does empower people in the community who may not want to be part of a formal, like going to the annual meeting. I know that was always a hard thing when I was president, and we would, and actually through you, Mr. Chair, I got a lot of advice from Sandy Levin on how to set this up and how to do the bylaws and how to get members and all of that. And so it was really helpful. But there are people that just don't want to come to that kind of a meeting. But knowing some of the actions that take place, getting communications from the executive of a homeowners association, it creates that feeling of community. And so I know in particular in my neighborhood, there are families that have built community rinks. That's mentioned in the previous report that Ms. Livingston brought to us, the idea of community rinks. And the city, I know the city has done a lot to support the community rink in my own neighborhood. They've leveled the earth, they flood it the first time around, and the whole neighborhood goes out and enjoys that. And movie nights as well. I know that within the community, just families take it upon themselves to have a movie night in the park with their own equipment and their own stuff. So all of this sort of complements each other and creates that sense of community. I just wanted to give one word of caution about talking about empowerment. We have to make sure we don't just talk the talk, we have to walk the talk as well. So when we say we're going to empower communities for decision making, and then we sort of have this real big monolithic government structure, bureaucratic structure, and this is the way things work and they've always been. So sometimes we can contradict that when we promise people they're going to have some empowerment to make decisions within their own community, and then they might face the brick wall of City Hall. So I just wanted to throw that out there. It's something that, we're working on, I know, as the city, and I know people like Ms. Livingston are really actively working on that. So that's all. Thank you very much.
Councillor Squire.
First of all, to Mr. Levin, if you want to take over the pothole duty in Ward 6, you are free to do that at any time. I will hand it over to you. Don't worry about it. On Councillor Morgan's motion, I'm going to be voting against it. I sort of drew a line in the sand last week that if people brought motions to a meeting, I didn't have a chance to look them over, prioritize how that fit in, I was not going to support them. So I don't want to influence anyone. It may be a great expenditure of that $20,000, but without me having the ability to talk to my community and say, what do you think of this? I'm sort of left in the dark. So I'm going to vote against it, and it may be the best idea, and I wish everybody the best of luck if it gets support. And I may even change my vote between now and council if I get more information. But I sort of have made the decision that I'm not going to welcome motions made on the floor anymore.
So I believe, Councillor Armstrong, you were saying you wanted to separate C? Sure. So we'll get to staff to do that, but in the meanwhile, did you want to speak?
Yeah, just if we separate C, it may mean somebody can support A and B, but not C. So I think that would be appropriate.
Sure. So we'll get the staff to do that. Councillor Usher, you wanted to speak?
First of all, I'm going to ask you a question about this C. I belong to an organization where we bought one of these, and 10 years after we didn't know where it was, bought another one, and 10 years after we didn't know, and because of the transition of people moving from in and out, the person who was looking, and I'm not against it so much, it's just, any idea how you would take care of something like this and be able to pass it from one organization to the other? On loan, I guess.
Sorry, through the chair, the equipment is owned by the City of London. Parks operations staff, when residents sign up for a movie night, park operations staff brings the equipment to the movie. I have 2 summer staff. They help the residents set it up. They stay there, and at the end of the movie night, parks operations staff takes the movie equipment back to our locked community center.
Through you, Mr. Chair, Cheryl, you're talking as though we have one already. What are we talking about buying one?
Through the chair, we do have one. However, there's only so many weekends in the summer. So we've totally filled our weekends in the summer that are available to show movies because it's a small window that we can show our movies with.
So in essence, this is like an extra 1 or 2 or whatever it is, am I right?
Through the chair, that's correct. So we can double up on and sometimes triple up on our movies on each weekend.
Thank you very much. While I have the chair, not the chair, but while I have the opportunity, I'm going to say to you that I like this very, very much. And one of the reasons is because at FCM, we always say, great cities build great nations. And I read in here where you, where you said, great neighborhoods, build great cities. And I fully agree with that. So we're going to come from it and we're going to say great individuals build great neighborhoods build great communities build great cities, and great cities build great nations. How about that? Eh? Lastly, I could name and I could picture almost every house and person who lived in those houses when I was a kid, within half a mile radius. Today, I could still remember that, I could still picture it. And that is because it was like a village raising a child, so to speak. And I think that, relatively speaking, this is what we're talking about. So I just thought I would throw that out for goodness sake. Thank you.
So we'll call parts A and B, and then we'll get to part C, which is the additional piece brought by Councilor Morgan. So no further speakers, we'll call parts A and B. Great, and we're voting.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
So we'll look for, so thank you for the presentation again, Ms. Livingston, and as well as the Neighborhood Association and all the folks that came out. Thank you so much. But we're doing part C now, so we'll look for a mover and a seconder. The motion will come up on the screen, and if that's not the case, we'll then not discuss it if there's not a mover and seconder, I guess. Oh, all right. Councilor Cassidy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would love to hear what staff thinks of this. Is this something that, that you've been thinking about for a while? You're thinking of coming to council and say, hey, we need another movie kit? Give me an indication of what the wait list is like. This is $20,000. It's money. It's not a ton of money, but you know, we have to watch if we're gonna, I don't know, what's the old saying? You gotta, you gotta look after the pennies just as much as the dollars, right? It all adds up. So, you know, coming from this reserve fund, are there other more important pressing issues that we could spend this money on, or is this something that is something you've been thinking about for a while?
Through the chair, I'll ask Cheryl to Ms. Smith to comment on what the wait list looks like. But what I would say to you is that the scale up comment that I made through the Child and Youth Agenda would apply here. We know that this is a very successful tool for having neighborhoods come out and spend time with each other. And if we could do more, we would. The reality is we are constrained by the amount of equipment we have. So if there was an ability to do more, we would. It's hugely popular. It brings people together. It is a small thing that we can do. And it is, the barrier for us as a team is the capital cost, the infrastructure cost. We can accommodate the operating impacts within our existing budget, but the barrier for us right now is the capital cost.
Sorry, through the chair, we currently have 5 neighborhoods who are on the waiting list to hold movie nights this summer.
And I know in the CYN report that we actually even have, target neighborhoods that where we want to, are those 5 within, is that who we're reaching with these kinds of things?
Through the chair, we are spread throughout the city of London in all neighborhoods.
Okay, thank you, through you, Mr. Chair, for that information. That's hugely helpful to me, and based on that, I can support this, absolutely.
So, Councillor Armstrong, you wanted to speak earlier? Are you okay now?
No, I just wanted to say something.
Councillor.
No, I think our staff basically, that was my question. Is there another place where you would get more bang for your buck? But you're saying this is a good investment, so how can you beat that?
All right, Councillor Armstrong, sorry, Usher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to support this, but I just don't want us to keep adding and adding and adding things to it. I'm quite prepared to accept this one based on what I hear. Okay.
And I believe we'll call the question if there's no further speakers. Sure.
Yes, I'm sure. I won't screw this up. Don't worry. I want to appreciate the questions my colleagues asked, and I will commit to passing along all of the research that I've done on this to colleagues before council so that they can certainly weigh their decision. It sounds like it's going to pass, and thank you. I will say one thing. It is a source of funding that comes from the Community Investment Reserve Fund. It is very appropriate, and this is one of those funds that council has to provide some direction and enhancements to programs that they see value in. So I will certainly endeavor to get everything I've done out to all of my colleagues in advance of the meeting, and I thank very much the debate tonight.
Councillor Cassidy.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I had forgotten one point that I wanted, a question that I wanted to ask. We talked about in the last report, the CYN report, about leveraging dollars. And is there any opportunity to leverage this whole idea with community partners, with people that are involved in CYN, to see if we could get some of those community organizations to donate a kit themselves so we can take this even further?
Through the chair, I'm happy to table that at the child and youth agenda, or perhaps look through our family center model. That will take time, but I'm happy to look at that for a future step.
And with that, we'll call the question.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-1.
All right, so we have a PPM. So we have item number 10 for a public participation meeting. And so I'll go to Mr. Katolik, and I think I see some people from the public setting themselves up to speak, possibly. So we'll get a motion to open up the PPM. Norris will get his all good to go.
Thank you. This is the 4th public participation meeting in a series of meetings to receive public input and feedback on modernizing the business licensing bylaw. And tonight, the focus is on 3 existing categories. First one is food premise. Currently, the business licensing bylaw differentiates between eating establishments and food shops, and then it further categorizes eating establishments by size, so occupancy, number of chairs. And what we did is we consolidated these categories into one category, which we're calling a food premise. So in terms of our inspections protocol, nothing changes. We're still going out with fire, property standards, health unit on doing inspections for new applications and inspections on renewals. And right now we have under this new category 815 locations. The second existing category is refreshment vehicles, and you will recall that this council and previous council had a lot of debate about food trucks. We have 70 licenses that we've issued for a variety of different categories within the existing licensing bylaw. Under this category, we have, or under this business license, we have 7 categories currently. We've consolidated those into 3. We differentiated on where the food is prepared, so whether it's prepackaged or prepared on site, and further differentiated whether the vehicle is motorized or not. The other thing we looked at under this regulation is the use of delegated authority. So a lot of the operational regulations are delegated to the license manager, which means they could be done administratively with public feedback and not having to come to public participations each time we want to change a operational matter. Lastly, we looked at automotive service establishments. And once again, under the current bylaw, we had 7 different categories. We consolidated into one, and there's no change in the inspection protocol in terms of who goes out and when they go out to inspect. This is also a very busy category for us with around 700 licenses issued annually. Thanks, and I can answer any technical questions you may have.
Just, if you can just make sure I understand this correctly, Class 1, Class 2, Class 3, and it's to do with the insurance part of the, you've got, am I right, Class 1 is, there's no requirement for insurance, Class 2, there is requirement, it's 2 million. Class 3 is 2 million plus 5 million, and I'm not really sure what the 2 million, 5 million. Is that 2 different types of insurance?
Yes, through the chair, that's focusing on the Class 3. So that category is a food truck that's motorized and making food on the truck. So there's general liability insurance in 5 million and also insurance of 2 million. So nothing changes from what is existing in the regulations today.
Okay, just, it's the insurance part I maybe don't understand. Class 3 is 2 million plus 5 million? Because I know Class 2 has said 2 million. Is Class 3 2 million, or is it 5 million, or is it 2 million plus 5 million? And what's general insurance versus, like, what's that other insurance? The 5 million, what is that?
The 5 million would be general liability insurance, and the 2 million is insurance, also insurance that was required previously under the bylaw.
Okay, so Class 3 is 2 million plus 5 million would be 7 million worth of insurance. It's just, what type of insurance is it? Like, is this to do with the vehicle? Is this to do with food preparation, like the business operation itself, or is it liability to do with the vehicle? Like, I'm not really quite sure how you have 2 and 5 million. Like, can I get a little more information on that? And I know if you had it before, that's fine, but I just want to understand, what are these insurances?
Through the chair, I'd have to speak with our risk experts and report back on that.
Okay, report, just if I'm good with it, if they could just send me an email breaking it out. I don't need it to be here or anything. Thanks.
Great, so I'll look, without technical questions, I'll look to open up the PPM. So I can believe it was moved and seconded. And we'll call the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
So we'll look for speakers if they want to line up besides the microphones. You have 5 minutes. I'll try to wave you at the 4-minute mark. You're familiar with this, so you'll be a great first example. And please state your name and address as well.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. My name's Chris Bunting. Address is 234 Whisperwood Avenue, N6K4E8. I'm also the owner of the Gouda Gourmet Grilled Cheese Truck. So yeah, I've done this a couple times. So I appreciate everybody taking the time, obviously, to listen to some of our thoughts, or my thoughts specifically on the changed or proposed changes. First, I'd like to acknowledge, obviously, the change from the $1,250, or proposed change from the $1,250 licensing fee down to $500. Obviously, that every dollar counts. I think that's come up a couple times tonight, and that's no different for us, so that's significant. That being said, I understand, obviously, looking at it, that it talks about the need to cover administration and enforcement costs. You know, over the last 4 years as a food truck operator, I've been subject to all the same health inspections on an annual basis as any restaurant. From an enforcement point of view or bylaws, obviously we haven't had any issues, or I haven't had any issues specifically over the last 4 years that I've owned the food truck in London. So that all being said, I understand, and like I said, I appreciate the $500, but there is still a fairly significant gap between $500 and the $179 proposed for the food, for the restaurants. So I would ask, obviously, that be considered, because to me, I mean, a food truck, yeah, it's a bit of a different business model. We're on wheels, but as far as the inspections and the administration and the enforcement, I don't really see any differences. Like I said, I am still happy with the $500 if that change can't be made, but if it couldn't, I would ask that if we could maybe have a bit of a better understanding as to what that extra money is, why that's there, like why it costs us that extra money to run a food truck. The second point I wanted to kind of bring up around, there's a couple things specifically, I think it's 5.2.E. It says a Class 3 refreshment vehicle shall not be permitted to locate where, in the opinion of the license manager, it may impede the movement of vehicles or pedestrians along a street, boulevard, or sidewalk, or create a public safety hazard. Now, I think from a general, obviously, public safety, that makes sense to me, that point. I guess the concern is, and concern talking to some of my colleagues is this going to be a thing where all of a sudden we end up penalized for our own success, where we have, our food truck Fridays, like that some of you may have seen out front of London Life. They're very, very popular. We have lines as a result of that. And that all of a sudden now this is, we run into potentially not being able to operate in that location because of our own success. So I just want to maybe ask for some clarification there. No different than, a theater that has an opening and a lineup out front, or a popular nightclub that has a lineup out front. I want to make sure that those aren't the types of things that would be looked at with regards to that point. And then the only other one I really wanted to kind of highlight for the purpose of this meeting, it says so no person should operate a Class 3 refreshment vehicle at a location that is not prescribed by the license manager. That's a very kind of broad stroke statement. I mean, London's a very, very big place. We've been operating for the last couple of years under the idea that, okay, we can't go in certain residential areas. We have to remain 25 meters away from restaurants in the last year, unless obviously we have written permission from them. Because recognizing that obviously when the bylaw first came out, and London is a very, very big place, the city didn't really have the resources to go through the entire city and kind of say this spot yes, this spot no. So just with that statement, again, if we could have some clarification, if the intent was then for the city to go through and actually tell us everywhere in the city that we can or cannot go, or if we're going to be still following kind of the old way, where as long as we're adhering to the kind of the different distances, et cetera, we're okay. Thank you.
Look for any other speakers. Just line up by a microphone.
Lower down. My name is Todd, T-O-D-D, LeBlanc, L-E-B-L-A-N-C. I am the owner of the Cocoaville food truck, newly launched as of last September. I'd like to thank committee from a year and a half ago for listening to our point of view when we came in with concerns of capping to the extent of how many trucks we'd allow. I had almost, at that point, been willing to dissolve my dream because I was very concerned I may invest $120,000 or more in my life and not be able to get a license. So I commend the committee and council for lifting that cap, allowing me my dream. I would like to underscore and agree with Chris, my colleague, on the points he raised. I won't reiterate those. He made them articulately. But I would like to bring up for consideration, as we are all struggling out there, a certain issue with regards to trying to be proper and good members of the community with regards to our food truck, but the issues of parking and the fact that, folks, I have to tell you, it's not fun getting up at 4 in the morning to make sure your truck is parked by 5:30 in the morning to be able to get the parking spot or be in the few parking spots we're allowed to be in, to then
wait from 5:30 in the morning till 8 to start feeding the parking meter, so we're good citizens and not breaching, to be able to then open our truck at 11 in the morning and provide 2 hours of food service. This is something I know committee and council can take consideration of, hear our points of view. I know there is some discussion with the city itself as to how to help us. I just want to bring that directly to committee's attention, because I'll tell you, when you're out there 4 to 7 days a week, and sometimes we're working the evenings till as late as maybe 10 or 11 o'clock at night. We're not out beyond that. But you get back into your warehouse, you redress your truck to be in compliance with Middlesex Health Unit. You're home at 1 in the morning. You're back up at 4 to try to do it again. Yes, it is our choice, and I acknowledge, but I think there is a way to work in partnership and cooperation with the city to get some help, be it allocating areas and we prepay. I know Mr. Armstrong, it had come up a year and a half ago about the parking passes. Just trying to revisit and give a point of view that you might not be seeing that we're living. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and look for, this is PPM. Is there any other speakers?
Hello, my name is Tony Vieira, 148 Millbank Drive. And I'm going to have to apologize, I'm not a good public speaker, but okay, I've owned an automotive business in the City of London for over 20 years now. The one time I had moved my location partway through the year, I ended up paying a $245 licensing application fee plus $110 that I'd already paid for that year. In 2016, I opened up another new location. We didn't receive our license till the end of November, so that was $246 and had a $110 application fee, which, you know, that $245 lasted us a month. I guess my concern is there's a lot of shops in my area that are operating without licenses, and they've operated for many, many years without it. One of these shops has been operating for at least 8 years. They've received $250 in fines. I've spoken to Ors many times over this. I just feel that the fine should be increased. The fine is $125. It's a lot less than even the application fee or the license fee that I pay every year to operate my business. There's another shop in my area that's been operating without a license as well. And they were awarded a city contract, which again, I just find frustrating. You know, in those 8 years, I've spent over $1,000 in license fees, and there's businesses out there being awarded contracts without even a license. I'll give an example. At our new location, which has been in operation for 7 months now, we had a mobile sign installed. By law enforcement was there within 2 days, warned us that it was on city property, it had to be moved. The sign contractor moved the sign. They were a foot over the property line. They received a $300 fine. Meanwhile, somebody operating a garage is $125, and there's public safety involved. It doesn't make much sense. I did speak to one of my city councilors about this concern a few years back, and her comment was I was upset because it was competition. If these same businesses had to comply with the same regulations that I had to do, then that would be fair competition. I'd have no problem with it at all. Then lastly, we opened a new location at the end of 2016. We had fire building. We were forced to put an oil interceptor into a building that never had one. We spent $8,000 to comply to get our license. The same shop that was down the street that's not licensed, they're in the process of doing it now. The inspector was going to allow them not to put an interceptor in, and they are in the exact same type of business. So again, it's frustrating as a business owner when the inspectors, they're not consistent with their calls. So again, it's not fair competition, and I would just, you know, I guess my biggest thing is to allow by law enforcement more power. That $125 fee or fine is a joke. It's got to be much higher. It's $5,000. It's got to be something, because these shops have been operating, like the one, for 8 years now. He thinks it's a joke because he knows I've spent $1,000. He's paid $250 in those 8 years. It's, you know, the $125 isn't working. Thank you for your time.
Any other speakers? So going once, going twice, and going 3 times, and we'll close the public participation meeting. So we'll get that on the screen and we'll look for a mover and seconder. Maybe if committee wants, if they want Mr. Katolik to kind of answer some of the questions that were asked, it might be beneficial so we all don't bombard him with the same question. But call the question. And we're voting.
Closing the vote, and the motion carries 5-0.
Mr. Katolik?
Yes, thank you. I'll start with the fee for the Class 3 refreshment vehicle license. And this was greatly debated by previous council and the current council. And the fee that we're recommending, we are satisfied that that fee has a nexus with the administration and enforcement of the bylaws. So the way we are looking at fees for the entire rewrite of the business licensing bylaw is that we're looking at how many times we're going out to certain categories. We're looking at the administration costs for the renewals, and we're averaging that over 5 years. So we are confident that we could justify the fee of $500 for a Class 3 refreshment vehicle, knowing that we've more than halved it. It's currently over $1,200. And in terms of looking at refreshment vehicles from an enforcement perspective, the same as looking at restaurants, we are going out to refreshment vehicles far more than we are to restaurants, because these are mobile restaurants. So just today, we received a complaint that there was a refreshment vehicle parked too close to a restaurant, so we went out and investigated it. And yes, one specific restaurant is going to allow, because we built in flexibility into the bylaw. So if one restaurant says, I'm okay with that food truck within that 25-meter circumference around my restaurant, as long as others aren't outside of that, I'm fine with that. So those are the types of complaints that we get, and those are the types of costs we have with enforcing this specific section of the bylaw. With respect to 52E, that is a carryover regulation, and we put that in there simply to, in situations where vehicles are parked too close to intersections where they may be impeding vehicular or pedestrian traffic, we would simply ask those vehicles to move to a location where that site triangle is not impeded. So that's a carryover. We're not fining under this section, but it allows us to ask the trucks to move to a safer location. With respect to prescribing locations, once again, that is a very flexible regulation that's delegated to the license manager. And we're currently doing that right now, where we have a map that you can view in a clerk's office. And that indicates all the locations, and there's close to 200 locations in and around the downtown that a food truck can locate. And we were very specific when we presented this to council that we didn't want to come back to council, hold another public participation meeting, because we're gonna add 10 more spots where a food truck can locate. We can do that administratively and post it on the web and put it through the city clerk's office as an administrative decision. With respect to the comments about getting parking spots, that was also debated. And we went with the model of first come, first serve. We didn't say that, you know, right now we have 7 licensed food trucks. We didn't say that license number 1 gets this spot on Tuesday, license number 2 gets this spot on Wednesday, because that would be an administrative nightmare to do. with so little food trucks in the city of our size. So currently, yes, you have to feed the meter, but it's all based on supply and demand. So if all the food trucks are parked in front of London Life like they are, if they were parked in front of the Hilton like they also do, whoever gets there first, gets there first. We don't currently support with so few food trucks that we reserve spots and say that only the food truck that has license number 1 can park here. With respect to the automotive comments, I have had many discussions with Mr. Vieira over numerous years, and our position has always been, if a citizen or a competitor or anybody is aware of an unlicensed establishment, they could advise the city and we will investigate. We treat everybody equally. We rely on the expertise of our property standards and building inspectors to make decisions where oil interceptors are required and where they're not. And the fines, yes, they could be on the low end of the fine spectrum, but once a property is fined a couple times, we could ramp that up to what's called a Part 3 fine, a summons to court. And in our evidence, we would indicate, yes, this property has been fined previously. This is why we're in court. This is why we started out with a lower Part 1 fine, but now we're in court and we would likely be asking for a higher fine. But unequivocally, any citizen can make a complaint about unlicensed establishments. The reality is, many times, it's competitors complaining that, you know, I'm running a hair salon, I comply with health standards, city standards, but down the street, somebody's running one and they're not licensed. And we have protocol to investigate all of those complaints.
Thank you, Mr. Katolik, and I think it's also beneficial to mention to my colleagues, so this, if I'm not mistaken, correct me, Mr. Katolik, this PPM will roll in, or this discussion will roll into a bigger discussion in September as part of Squire's favorite omnibus kind of a bill. So I'll go to Armstrong and Usher.
I'm very satisfied with what staff has said. I guess the thing is, always with, one concern I always had was with backyard, we'll call them mechanics, though they're not mechanics, like unlicensed individuals who do repairs in their garage for money. You know, of course, nobody's has a problem with people who like cars and fix their own cars and buy cars, but there are those people who operate outside of the industry altogether, doing work and in the automotive, you know, working on brakes, for an example. I mean, you're unlicensed individuals. So I hope that we are proactive, because I have had shops mention that to me, that it's a very big concern out there, that people who regularly bring cars in and doing work on a daily basis on the quiet, you know, door closed and in and out and that sort of thing. I hope we're going to continue to be proactive in seeking out and finding those individuals and making sure that they're stopped doing that, because when you work on cars, you should be properly licensed. You make a mistake, somebody could end up in a bad accident and no one will ever know it was because of poor workmanship or et cetera. So I hope we're proactive in that, because I think that's one issue. Also, I hope that, as staff has alluded to, that where the complaints are made that people aren't getting their proper licenses when they should have a license and can have a license, that staff will continue to be diligent in tracking those people down and making sure they conform to all the rules. So all the business people are on an even playing field all the time. You know, you don't mind competing as long as you're on this same playing field. So again, thank you.
Councillor Usher and then Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you very much. First of all, thanks, Mr. Katolik, for the presentation. I want to thank the gentleman for coming forward and making the comments and express the concern that they have. I think it's very important we understand those concerns. But I really do appreciate the response that Mr. Katolik gives. So I just have two questions based on some of the comments. Perhaps I don't understand, and maybe you could explain to me a little bit more. I'd be hard pressed if I have to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to run out there to do whatever it is what is it I have to do? Park a car there? And then at 8 o'clock, I start feeding the meter until 11 o'clock, so I have this spot to put my truck, or I have to bring the truck in at 4 o'clock in the morning. Well, could you explain that to me, Mr. Katolik?
Yes, through the chair, there's a regulation, and it was put in there to protect quality of life in neighborhoods and when the food trucks are operating. So there's a regulation in there saying that the food trucks can't operate between 3 a.m. and 7 a.m. And the way I understand the concern is there definitely are some higher demand parking locations. So perhaps some food trucks at 7 o'clock are driving out to grab those locations so they can do the lunch crowd serving, as opposed to maybe coming out at 10 o'clock because by that time their competition might have grabbed that spot, or there's vehicles that are parked there and have fed the meter and are doing business in and around the downtown.
So the spots are competitive to get also. It's not that you say, okay, on such and such a day you have this one spot and so on and so on. It's competitive. They know where they are and they have to jostle to get the best one for themselves.
Yes, that's correct. And in previous discussions, we looked at different models, but for a city this size and only having 7 food trucks, I don't see it as a big issue. If we had 30 food trucks and they were all coming to us as an association saying, we're fighting over 20 spots, we need a better solution, but that's just not the case.
And Mr. Katolik, I really thank you for the explanation with respect to the license fee. I do, for the Class 3, I do appreciate that. I hope the gentleman can accept that, at least for now. But my other concern is this one where, and I know you explained it, but why should a person be paying their license fee and somebody not paying it intentionally, and they could get a ticket? Can you ticket more often so that it costs more than $1,000?
Through the chair, we can ticket every day that the violation is in occurrence. But our practice, first of all, is through education, voluntary compliance, and then enforcement if required. So if enforcement is not working through what's called a Part 1 ticket, physical ticket, a regional judge makes a decision on the size of the fine. And if that's not working, then the next step is you go to court. And in court, you say, we've already issued a number of these tickets. The property's still in violation. We want a higher fine. And if that's not working, you go back to court and you say, we've already issued all these tickets. We got a fine. Now we're looking at a probation request, probation order, or prohibition order. So that's kind of like the spectrum of enforcement that our protocol that we use.
Is there any time when you could shut them down?
Yeah, we could shut them down if we got a prohibition order and they did not comply with that. Then they're in contempt of court. And then we would come back here and say, we want to go to court under contempt of court charges.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, I had that as a question as well. So I just want to be clear. So we don't set the fines?
Through the chair, we ask the Ministry of the Attorney General to set fines. We give recommendations, but when we're starting out, there's a spectrum of how much the fines can be. So I'll use the vehicle for hire bylaw. A new bylaw, we wouldn't go in and say, we want every fine to be $1,000. because they would come back to us and say that's not fair for the general public. So it's really focused on the size of fine is focused on the size and impact on the general public in terms of the violation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, or through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Katolik. So going back to the food, so the food premise category, that covers all restaurants, and so that would be 179 licensing fee for a restaurant?
No, that's correct.
Okay, so I know you explained that we are going out to food trucks more, so that explains some of the reason for the difference. But, you know, as you mentioned when speaking of the automotive service establishment, that a lot of the complaints are coming from competition. I suspect it's the same with food trucks. So I kind of agree with what the Gastro Gouda guy said. That it seems like a really big difference in licensing. Like, are we really, is it? So it seems to me like the visits for the food trucks, the automotive service establishments, tend to be complaint-driven and more so than restaurants? That's my question.
Yes, that's the case. When we passed the Category 7, the food truck bylaw, the fee was $1,225 for a new application. And that was based on a number of random and proactive site inspections. What we're finding is we're not going out that often to justify that fee. So we looked at our inspections and we reduced them for the food truck industry, and that's how we came up with the $500. So what we're doing in this entire review is we're taking the fees on an annual basis and looking them over 5 years and taking a 5-year average. And so, because right now the initial fees are a lot higher, the renewal fees are lower. So we're just having one fee across the board for each category, and we're consolidating the categories also. So making it more of a streamlined bylaw, user-friendly bylaw. In terms of restaurants, we're not going out to restaurants on complaints that they're unlicensed, but we are to food trucks because they locate at locations that they're not supposed to be, and that's when the complaints come in, like the one today.
Okay, and so do you have an idea of, I imagine sometimes the complaints are not valid necessarily, so how often would you say that our inspectors are going out because of a complaint only to find that the food truck in question is in complete compliance?
Through the chair, I don't have an answer for that right this moment, but I'll use today's example and the flexibility that we built in the bylaw. Is we get a complaint and we know that there's flexibility in the bylaw that one restaurant could say, you know what, I'm okay with that food truck within that circumference of my restaurant. So when we share that with a complainant, perhaps they're not all that happy, but there is flexibility in the bylaw. So that would be an invalid complaint, but we still went out, spent staff time to investigate it and explain it to the complainant. But we certainly are not going out as many times as we predicted when we put the bylaw in place. So if somebody asked today, can you justify a fee of $1,200 for a food truck? The answer would be no. Can you justify a fee of $500? The answer would be yes.
Okay, thank you. So based on that answer, I think, you know, it's not necessarily fair to penalize a food truck just because somebody submits an unjustified complaint. And so that's my only real concern with that $500 fee. And I'm hoping that at some point in the future, we'll do another review to see where we are, to see, and I'm hoping at some point in the future, people will just settle down and relax and realize that these food trucks are here to stay, and hopefully we'll get more of them. And so we'll see fewer of these invalid complaints coming through. With the parking thing, you mentioned that there are locations and there's a map and people can see it. Are those locations currently posted on the city website that anybody can go to and see where they could possibly park their food truck?
Through the chair, there's a map in the clerk's department. I believe it's on the website, but I'd like to clarify that because we have added more things to the website.
Okay, I'll be looking for that at council, hopefully. And you might not know this off the top of your head. Do you have any indication, are some of them or a good number of them like city pay station park? You know, I know along Richmond now you have pay stations instead of meters. Do we have a good mix of that, or are they mostly metered parking?
Where they're locating, they're going to generally pay stations because most of the areas in and around downtown, we're taking out meters. And where the food trucks are locating, they can't be within a certain distance of residential. So like around the south side of Vic Park, west side of Vic Park, that's all pay stations. So generally pay station.
Thank you. So my final question / comment, I guess. So the question is, we're going to continue to take more meters out and put in more pay stations in the downtown area, especially, I hope. And so food truck establishments would be able to use like the app, right? The Honk mobile app to instead of physically going out and putting coins in the meter?
Yes, food trucks can honk.
Perfect. So any further speakers before we call the question? Great. So I don't know how we do this because Councillor Usher moved it and he's not here. So oh, there he is. So Councillor Usher, we're just calling a question. Are you okay with that? Yep. Okay, so call a question.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 5-0.
So colleagues, I do believe we can probably dispense of the remainder relatively shortly. I think so. So let's just hammer right through. Good. Okay, so we'll go to number 11, which is the item I brought forward. So I'll pass the chair over to Councillor Usher, and I'll just move that.
Okay, we are on number 11. Is there any entertain a motion? Any speakers?
Yeah, that's my motion. I was gonna.
Councilor, you want to speak first?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
So I just wanted to bring this.
Councilor Sally.
Thank you. So I wanted to bring this forward. I know there was some recent news in relation to this, and maybe Mr. Catola can speak to that in relation to one particular company who's come forward and had some discussions, and I think it might be beneficial to us, and I know I've heard from many people, so I won't talk too long because I know you guys had a long night, so if I can have Mr. Catola maybe speak.
Yes, through the chair, the city manages 22 parking lots in the city. And what happens if a vehicle is parked in the city parking lot without feeding the meter or parked too long? They get a parking infraction notice, which is issued under the authority of the Provincial Offences Act. And on the back of this ticket, you have instructions on how to challenge the ticket. What happens in other facilities that are run by private companies, and there's several in the city and Park, Canada-wide, Metro. If you're parked at one of their locations and you haven't fed their meter, then you get a notice. And the notice, generally, the fees are quite a bit higher than our parking ticket. A program that we have in the city is called Private Parking Enforcement Program. We have over 400 properties that are invested in this program. And what it is they have asked the city to solve their parking problems by having the city go out through commissionaires, or they hire a private security company and we train them to issue city parking tickets. And the benefit of this being a win-win situation, it gets rid of the parking problem on the property. The city keeps the fine, and the fines all go to plate denial. whereas these notices are not issued under the Provincial Offences Act, and they do not go to plate denial. Plate denial is when you renew your MTO license and you realize that you've had a number of these, and before you get your MTO license, you have to pay up. So we have a very good working relationship with Impark. We've had discussions with them on this issue, and they have agreed to collaborate with us on this issue and do a pilot project where they would either train their staff or our commissioners would issue city parking tickets on properties that are managed by Impark. At this point, they have not specified which property they're looking at doing this pilot project with, but they also see this as a bit of a win-win situation because for the public recognizes that these tickets go to plate denial and these notices do not. So if you don't pay these notices, a collection agency will start calling you and asking you to pay these notices. These, you simply get 2 letters in the mail from the city, and if you don't pay, then it goes to plate denial. So I can report tonight that Impark is looking at a pilot project with our private parking enforcement program, and I could report on the outcome of that at a future meeting.
Councilor Squire.
I understand through the chair, if somebody voluntarily comes forward and says, I'd like to have the city enforce this, issue tickets, and I'm not sure if someone would legally challenge the authority of the city in court. I suppose that remains to be seen. It would be an interesting legal argument whether that could happen. But what if a parking lot says, look, we're not interested. We don't want to do this. We like issuing these tickets of our own, and we collect money, and we're doing pretty well at it. I would assume we don't have any ability to force a parking lot that wants to carry it on as a private business and send out their own infraction notices to continue doing that. Because my concern is I don't want to raise an expectation with the public that we're going to be doing this across the city in all parking lots. Because when I read the motion or the letter, that's what I was understanding it to mean, that somehow we were going to start enforcing parking in all these different parking lots. And I'm at a loss as to how we could do that. And it seems to me the only way we can do it, and legal is here, is if somebody agrees to it. Because if I own my own parking lot, for instance, when I go use an Impark parking lot, they charge me what they want to charge me and I pay it. It's convenient, it's near the hospital where I have to go represent a client, so I pay it. I have no idea if that's comparable to a city rate, I pay it, it's my choice. So I'm a little at a loss how what you said about these deals that are coming forward is the same as saying we can somehow exert our power over any private parking lot. So that's the problem I have, is raising that expectation that we can do something that we can't.
Through the chair, just to clarify, that's absolutely correct that it would be a voluntary on behalf of the property owner and or their agent to be part of this public parking enforcement program. We can't force anybody to issue our tickets as an alternative to issuing their notices.
Councilor Sally.
And just for clarification, and it might be helpful, so my intent was asking staff to see what steps could be taken, whether that was conversations, and this was just one example of those conversations, because what I think one part that was kind of missed but is important to talk about is when you get a fine from, a private parking lot, there's really not an appeals process, and I'm sure you as a lawyer can appreciate appeals, and that's kind of been some of the frustrations that I heard from people where they'll get a fine and they're not being able to speak to this. So I'm not forcing it down anyone. What we're hoping to do is really, what I think is continue to have conversations, have staff reach out to some of the private stakeholders and kind of say, well, what can we do to make sure things are actually consistent and reasonable versus, sometimes them seeming to be almost trying to profit off of some of these fines is how I saw it. So hopefully I'll have some support around the council committee around this.
Councilor Squire.
But I think, and I appreciate the sentiment, but what it says is what steps could be taken by the City of London to ensure that parking infractions on privately owned parking lots are enforced in the same manner et cetera, et cetera. I think the answer right now is if you own a private parking lot and you want to give somebody a piece of paper and says, you pay me as a fine $50, the choice, there's nothing we can do about it. We can't make them say, oh, there'll be an appeal or anything like that. And many times, I remember when we had QAP towing years ago, the public was upset, but I mean, there's lots of fines I've been given by private entities, and I just say, I'm not paying it. I mean, I'm not paying it. You have no legal authority to make me pay your fine. So I guess what I'm getting at is I understand the sentiment, but I think the answer is really clear. We can have a discussion with someone and say, look, if you want to sign on with the city and do it through us, great. But we have no ability to say to XYZ Parking, who operates a lot, hey, we want you to do it through us. We want you to have an appeal process. Their answer can just be no. So what I don't want to do is raise a public expectation that we have some authority we can exert. So that was my hesitancy in doing this. So I'm going to have trouble supporting this because I think it's not something we have the ability to do.
Mr. Katolik, you have any answer for that? I'll pass you if you don't have.
Through the chair, I would reiterate that I agree with Councillor Squire that you're absolutely correct. This is a voluntary initiative on behalf of a private property owner and or their agent that they wish to engage the services of commissionaires, or we could train their private security company. We have over 400 of these. We've issued 6,000 tickets last year, but it's strictly voluntary. We keep the fine money. If you want to appeal the ticket, we have a process in place, and it goes through plate denial, so the citizens, they know that if you don't pay a parking ticket, eventually you will.
Councillor Armstrong.
I'm always puzzled to do with those private tickets, how these agencies are able to get your address, your name, etc. Because, you know, the thing is, the ministry, if you have somebody's license, the only way you can connect the license with the name is through the ministry. And the ministry, in my mind, shouldn't be giving out people's names, addresses, or anything unless court action is contemplating or being pursued. Just issuing a non-government ticket to somebody, a demand note that you owe me money, in my mind, shouldn't justify the release of your personal information. I'm talking your name, your home address, and then through that, they're linking into, through collection agencies, they're linking into people's phone numbers that may be on file on unrelated issues. So that's all been kind of, I know a little bit about this, so I'm kind of troubling to me that that's going on. And I understand what our staff is doing as far as, you know, issuing citations on private property where people have overstayed, but I'm not even sure whether there might be some issues there. For now, I'll leave it because now's not the time to take up our. But I'm kind of puzzled about that too, how legally that can work for private property, that we're, you know, involved in that. I can see the benefit for sure, but I'm just concerned about the legalities of it. But that's not for today. That's for, I'll look into that and ask questions of staff later on. So I'll support this whenever it's appropriate.
Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Mr. Presiding Officer. Listening to both Councillor Squire and Mr. Katolik and agreeing, what if, I'm wondering if the mover might consider adding something in here such as, blah, 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 report back to me with respect to what steps, as a suggestion, and rather than saying, leaving it open like that, respect to what steps could be taken, what if we direct staff to reach out to private parking lot owners and encourage them or reach out to them to try to get them to participate in the private parking enforcement program? Is that something, I know that Mr. Katolik said that he's working or has worked and has been in discussions with Impark, but there are other private owners of parking lots. Could we direct staff to reach out to all of them and say, hey, we've got this program and we think you should participate in it?
Mr. Katolik?
No, well, I was asking both.
Through the chair, we would be fine with that direction. We do that now in terms of promoting our program because we feel it's successful in solving parking issues, specifically around high-demand parking areas like hospitals. So we have malls around hospitals, around educational facilities. There's a mall near Fanshawe. It's pretty booked in the morning, but none of the stores are open. So that's a program there that's worked successfully. So I'd concur with that direction.
Councilor Sally?
Sure, I have no problems with that, so I think to make it cleaner, the civic administration be directed to report back to CAPS with respect to what steps could be taken, and I guess reach out to stakeholders or something like that would make it.
Well, my suggestion through you, Mr. Presiding Officer, would be take out with respect to what steps could be taken, or just say civic administration be directed to reach out to private parking lot owners and encourage participation in the private parking lot program, private parking enforcement program, and then report back to Community and Protective Services or something like that. That it's your motion. I'm just making a suggestion.
Through the chair, I think, like, it's not, I don't think the motion is really being that imposing on staff in that sense. And the reason why I said what steps could be taken, because I think I might get some information back. And also, Councillor Armstrong did raise something that now I'm very curious about with the privacy on how they're doing that. So maybe when that information could come back in the future on some of that speeches. So I hope you're still okay with that piece.
Are we going to fix this up? I have something to say about it. Go ahead, Councilor Squire.
I just want to be really clear. I'm going to vote against this because I've already received the answers I need. We cannot take any steps to ensure these things. We can't do it. We don't have the authority. So if staff comes back with a report, it's going to say, you don't have the authority to do that. I've already got that answer. The next part of it is, should staff reach out to parking people and say, join our program? Mr. Katolik's already said he's doing it. I'm satisfied with that. So I think we're just creating work that isn't going to do anything. And I know it sounds good to say, we're going to go out and we're going to get Impark or whoever to sign on with us, and we can't do it.
Anyone else? Will you allow me to speak from here? I'm very concerned about this motion. I heard Mr. Katolik said he's working with Impact already, and he's doing some good work with them. Gosh, I don't know why we're going to this. I think that this motion, if you want to do it, we should wait to see what happens there, and if you want to expand on that, you expand on that. Why interfere with what he's doing right now? We do this and we get staff to do more work, we dump more load on them, and this is one of those things. He's doing the work already. Why try to change it? Please, I'm going to vote against it. With all due respect, I understand where you want to go with it, but I think that I'm satisfied with where Mr. Katolik is going right now. And if it doesn't work, if we need more, then I'll say we need more at the time. So, we'll call the vote. Do we have the corrections that is made? The update, there it is. Oh. Where's my arrow?
Who's chairing?
You want to speak? Clerk wants to add something to this. Go ahead, Barb.
Thank you, through the chair. This motion has not been amended from, based on the discussion. This was on the floor, so this is unchanged, and I just wanted that to be clear. If there's the committee wanting refinements to this, we'll need to withdraw this motion and start over again. If you're satisfied with voting on it as it is, then here you go.
So withdraw it so it could make the amendments, the changes, so. Mr. Chair, I have a question in the meanwhile. Presiding Chair, can I ask a question in the meanwhile?
Yeah, please, go and ask the question. Who you want?
So I'm just curious, because Armstrong asked it, and if you could, maybe briefly, if you could just kind of touch on his question. So how are these private lots right now getting that information? And are they doing so in a legal manner? I'm not sure if you're able to answer that, but I'm just curious.
Through the chair, I'm not able to answer any of those questions.
What do you know, Bill Armstrong? Councillor Armstrong?
Because, well, you know, I do other things besides city council, right? So, you know, I don't think, I think the thing is, Mr. Chair, I think that they're, what's happening here is they're contacting the ministry and the ministry's giving them that information. I think that's the only way you could track down the name and address of people. And I'm not so sure the ministry, I would question whether the ministry should be doing that. Because I know in other areas, it's not so easy to contact the ministry. You have to be involved in a legal action or pending in order to get that information. That's what I think's going on, but I could be wrong, but I'm sure we could always ask them.
Great, so they're just tweaking a couple of the words, so. Oh, sorry, I'm not the chair right now. But.
I'm not passing the chair on to you until after the vote.
I guess I did have another comment while they're doing that. I'll take this opportunity.
Go ahead.
I think Councilor Armstrong does raise a valid point. So I just wonder, can we just not ask the ministry to say, stop giving people's investigate and kind of say, well, how's this information getting out there? I'm not sure if legal knows by chance or anyone knows, because it just kind of seems kind of odd to me that you can get someone's information like that in a private parking lot. Just like, how do we get it? How do you get the information? Is it on our database?
Through the chair, we have an agreement with Ministry of Transportation, and we have to log and we get audited on why we are running plates. So that's what I can say about our agreement with the ministry. I can't speak on how private investigators or how anybody else gets that information. That's a provincial, something you should be asking the province.
Okay, would you kindly read this over, Mr. Katolik? Are you reading this? Okay. Somebody move it inside. Oh, Councilor Cassidy.
Thank you, Mr. Presiding Officer. I just want to say, you know, despite the things I said earlier, I'm not going to support this. I've heard sorry, I've heard from Councilor Squire, heard from Mr. Katolik. We're already doing this. I agree with Councilor Squire.
Okay, let's call the vote.
Yeah.
Closing the vote, the motion fails 3-2.
Okay, we need a motion to receive the correspondence.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Thank you all. Mr. Chair, I'd like to return control to you, and I'd like to make a motion. I'd like to move 12 to 17.
Great. We'll put that on the floor. Any speakers? All right, we'll call the question. And we're voting.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
And we have item number 19, staff report. So I believe it's going to be a brief, short report.
We did 18 already.
Yeah, you put it on the floor. Oh, we did that earlier with, so sorry, who's presenting number 18? Sorry, 19? Did anyone want to hear the staff or? If you could be brief, go ahead.
Through the chair, the members of the committee will remember that last year the city staff was directed to go away and negotiate a grant agreement for the BMO Center for the expansion of their facility on Rectory Street. What you have in front of you now is what staff recommends as a grant agreement. It contains a number of the items that council identified as wanting to have in the agreement. And so we commend it to the committee and hopefully ultimately to council. I can answer any questions.
Okay, any speakers? Seeing none, we'll look for a motion to receive. It's already been moved and seconded. And we'll, I'll just make sure Squire, did you want to speak to this or are you good? The BMO, okay, and we'll call the question. And we're voting.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Number 20, deferred matters list. Any more speakers? And we'll put a motion up look for a mover and a seconder. Before we go, Ms. Livingston wanted to speak.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I'll be very quick. I would just like to note that item number 3, we actually dealt with in our report on HKCC this evening, so that matter's closed.
Great. Do we need that in the motion or is that okay? They'll update it. Great. So no speakers and we'll we'll call the question.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
So before we just adjourn, colleagues, I just wanted to just take a moment, because I'm not sure if it was done earlier at the committee earlier, with a moment of silence for the victims in Manchester. So if we could just all take a moment to rise and pay a moment of silence for. Thank you. Move the adjournment by Councillor Cassidy, seconded by Councillor Squire. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? Carries.